This is a part 2 of a 2-part video. Part 1 will be linked in the description, while the full version of this video, so part 1 and this part, should be in the description as well as on screen right now. It's not necessary to have seen all of part 1 in order to watch this video, and in fact, this video will be useful in more easily navigating to specific chapters and episode perspectives, as YouTube only allows for 100 chapters per video, and the combined parts 1 and 2 will have more than that. The introduction section will be cut out of the full version of this video, so I want to avoid including any information here that cannot be cut out of a proper series review. I will, however, recap the premise of the video, just in case it's been a while, or if you are only showing up for the first time now. I have never seen Steven Universe before, and I am watching it for the first time as I make this retrospective. This means that the episode recaps and reviews will only include details that I am noticing on a first watch-through, and that I won't be able to discuss how an episode sets up a later plot, only pointing out these connections at the end of the linked episodes. The intent of the recaps of each episode is to show, rather than tell, what aspects of the plot I've noticed, details, and so on, as well as what I think is relevant. The overall vibe of this retrospective should be like a very one-sided discussion with a friend of yours who just watched a TV show for the first time. Unless you don't want it to be one-sided, in which case leave a comment or whatever. Super Watermelon Island. Steven awakens on the island from island adventure inside the body of a watermelon, being led to a village started by the watermelons from Watermelon Steven that even has its own pseudo-religion established. This religion eventually chooses him to be led to a cliff where he strikes a pose and, after an earthquake, malachite emerges from the water, attacking Steven where he wakes up at the barn again. Peridot warns them about these frequent earthquakes being a sign that the cluster is about to emerge, but Steven's seen that they were caused by Lapis fighting Jasper underwater. So the crystal gems move out to fight Malachite on the island, leaving Steven behind with Peridot due to the danger. Once more, Steven is left out of the fighting as the crystal gems don't want him in trouble. Though, as Peridot points out, the crystal gems are all about rebellion, so if he wants to help, he should just go. Steven takes a nap so he can appear in the body of a different watermelon, where he sees Alexandrite preparing to fight a Malachite who's finally given up on fighting themselves and has allowed Jasper's mind to take over. Alexandrite is losing this battle and Steven's powerless to do anything to help, but he remembers there are hundreds of other watermelons on the island, and he returns to a cave where they're all cowering, awaiting the end of the fight. Just as Peridot convinced him before, Steven convinces the others that they need to stand up for themselves and fight rather than being treated like liabilities, and he leads an army to attack Malachite to help Alexandrite. The watermelons don't accomplish much more than a distraction, and a lot of them are smashed by a rampaging Malachite, but they do create enough time for Alexandrite to break free from ice and throw Malachite into the air. She then fires Opal's bow into the sky, which forms an arrow that strongly resembles the laser-like cannon's beam, that then splits the two fused gems apart. They're about to celebrate a job well done when the earthquakes continue, and Jasper falls into a fissure, meaning Peridot was right about their cause. These earthquakes destroy the island's warp pad, so Steven has to wake up and activate the drill with Peridot, and without the others, as it'll take them too long to return. Gem Drill. The episode picks up where the last one left off, with Steven and Peridot hopping inside of the gem drill, despite not really being sure what their actual plan is besides drilling down. The two spend a long time headed into the Earth's core, reassuring each other along the way they'll be okay as they have each other. Neither Steven nor Peridot is confident in themselves, but they try to confide their confidence in the other one despite this, not strong individually, but strong together. As they break through the Earth's crust, the drill is surrounded by peridotite, which is the stuff that she used to be made of back on Homeworld before Peridot formed. She admits she has some fondness for her home planet, even after betraying it for Earth, but this fondness only makes her sympathize with Steven even more, because she understands his own feelings for Earth better. They begin to get attacked by several gem shards that have taken the form of bodiless limbs, but Peridot blasts them away with a built-in cannon. Steven feels bad about doing this, though Peridot assures him that the limbs don't understand what they're doing and are only acting on instincts that were built into them at creation. This is, of course, the same way Peridot has thought for a majority of her life until landing on Earth and meeting the crystal gems, then unlearning so much of how she used to think. Finally, the two arrive at the cluster, a mass of billions of gem shards that have fused together, and they prepare to drill into it. But Steven is so uncomfortable he physically recoils at this prospect. Then he begins to talk to the cluster, where he learns that it doesn't want to form, even if it doesn't know how to prevent this. The cluster is basically one giant forced fusion, the type of thing that Garnet was freaked out by a while back. And even back then, they were portrayed as being in pain in some way, so making a giant fusion that would destroy the planet isn't great for anyone, and not even the cluster itself. Steven is able to recognize this, and he begins to talk to each part of the cluster's gem shards, telling them that they can be bubbled to prevent violently growing. He attempts to do this by bubbling them all manually, but there are far too many to do this himself, until Steven notices the gem shards are beginning to bubble each other bit by bit, and exponentially the bubbles spread alongside the idea there's a better way to exist. Once the entire cluster is bubbled, Steven rests easy, knowing that not only are they no longer a threat to the Earth, but they're not a threat to themselves, since they can keep each other company. Bubbling the cluster was a monumental task for one person, but not for a large group working together, and this refers not only to the cluster itself, but the crystal gems too. Same old world. The crystal gems are listening to Peridot tell the story about how they bubbled the cluster, but Steven's too focused on Lapis, who is recovering from her extended fusion after being saved at the start of the season. She does eventually come to, saying that she can no longer stay on Earth and flying away while Steven says his goodbyes. Greg and the temple gems have packed up everything they used for the drill and are ready to return home, with Peridot opting to stay in the barn to decorate it and fix it up a bit. Steven says he'll ride Lion home and begins to search for his pet. And I recently learned that Rebecca Sugar has a pet cat named Lion, and this makes every interaction Steven has with the big cat suddenly make a lot more sense. He instead finds Lapis, sitting on the roof of a silo having returned. She says that she has no place to go because she can't return to Homeworld after what she did, nor does she feel like she belongs on Earth. So Steven offers to be her tour guide as they fly around the area nearby, that way she can find a place she better belongs. He talks to her about the life she might have in the countryside, or the big city, or the other big cities that's worse. But soon they're over the ocean where she finds the galaxy warp. This makes her land as she begins to recall the memories Steven asks her about. Lapis recalls that she was poofed during Rose's rebellion by a soldier with way more detail than the rest of the flashback characters. She was recovered later by Homeworld Gems, who assumed she was one of the rebels. After interrogation and being trapped inside the mirror, Lapis was cracked and left behind during a mass evacuation of the planet, found later by Pearl. Lapis is upset as she always feels like a prisoner no matter where she goes, be it one physically or mentally trapped by bad memories of the place. But Steven shows her the leaf from their trip to the countryside, pointing out its changes and saying that places change just like people. Just because she has trauma in the past doesn't mean she has reason to be afraid of the future, and home is wherever you put the work in to make a home. Lapis decides that she'll stay on Earth and make the barn into her house, just like Peridot said she would do. Barnmates. Peridot is making plans on how to make up with Lapis, hoping they can put their past behind them and live together in the barn. But Lapis wants nothing to do with Peridot due to the fact that she trapped and took advantage of her in the past, and she leaves to sleep on the roof of the silo instead. So Steven and Peridot brainstorm ways to convince Lapis that Peridot has changed and that she isn't the same she used to be, coming up with the idea to make a card. When this doesn't work, they use the gem drill hole to make an artificial lake for Lapis, as they assume that she likes water, but she reminds them she spent a season and some change trapped underwater. Finally, Peridot decides to give her tape recorder to Lapis, as it was the thing that made it easier for her to adapt to Earth. But Lapis just smashes this, and tells Peridot to leave, so she does. Lapis's story thus far reflects the story of Peridot in that both of them are trapped on Earth and unable to return to their home, having to make the best of the situation they found themselves in. So from a certain perspective, they should have a lot in common, but while this is the case, it doesn't mean that the two need the same things out of their time. Lapis views the planet as yet another prison where she is trapped, while Peridot views it as the opposite, a place to be free from the Homeworld gems that are after her. Peridot returns quickly, being pursued by a giant eye meant to search the planet for gems. They all take cover in the barn for a while, but seeing how scared Peridot is, Lapis steps out and uses the water from the pool to take out the eye, saving them all. She turns to ask if Peridot's okay, realizing they're both trapped there, but before they can have this discussion, a ruby emerges from the eye. Hit the diamond. The eye opens up and a ruby emerges from it, and then another, until there are 5 rubies in total, 6 if you count Garnet. Garnet defuses to have a ruby infiltrate their ranks, where she learns they're seeking the gem who failed the Earth mission. She shows them Steven to convince the others that the planet's empty except for some humans, but when they don't stop this search, Steven convinces them to participate in a human activity of baseball to win the right to search. The rest of the gems come out of the barn save for Peridot, who watches from safety, and they pretend to be human so they can play the rubies and Ruby in baseball. As Steven is explaining the rules, he realizes that Ruby, not Ruby or Ruby or Ruby or Ruby or Ruby, is flirting with Sapphire and throwing the game as a result, though with some combined effort and taking advantage of the fact that Ruby, 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 and Ruby but not Ruby don't understand how humans work, they tie up the score in the final inning. Sapphire's up to bat, not using her future vision to see where the ball will be, and flirting with Ruby, not Ruby or you get the point by now. But Steven convinces her to take the game more seriously for a moment and she hits the game-winning run. Then she fuses into Garnet at the very end, revealing they were all gems all along. The rubies are shocked and fuse together in preparation for a fight, but Peridot comes out of the barn as she refuses to let other people get hurt for her battles. They then reveal that Peridot isn't the one they're after. They want Jasper, who fell into a fissure a few episodes back. As they don't actually know where she is, Steven lies and says she's off-planet. The rubies thank them for their time and fly to search Neptune. Steven floats. Steven is so excited to finally be home and get the first fresh donut of the day that he sets his alarm and waits in anticipation for Big Donut to open. He's so excited as he waits that he jumps around, learning that he can change the speed at which he leaps and falls. Steven proceeds to hop around the beach, looking down at the temple and the city before realizing he doesn't know how to fall faster and he's stuck in the sky. He manages to get the attention of the crystal gems and they try to brainstorm ways to assist him in going down faster, but when none of these work, they opt to, instead, keep him company by jumping over and over. Steven's alarm goes off and he realizes he's going to miss Big Donut opening, dreaming about the first, second, and so on donut being given away, that he then exaggerates into him starving to death in the sky. When he opens his eyes, he's falling faster. Steven's powers are based on his emotion, so when he's happy, he can leap into the air, and when he's sad, he falls dangerously fast. He attempts to think happy thoughts, but can't, even though he thinks of all the things he normally likes. Donuts are what he's missing out on by being so high in the air. The beach where he lives is also sad because that's a future impact site. It goes to show that just because something has positive connotations, it's not always a good thing to think about. Steven loves certain things, but part of loving something means mourning a loss of that thing. The good will come with the bad. He does manage to control his fall when he remembers the crystal gems, specifically how they've been up all night keeping him company when they couldn't stop his fall, and he hits the ground where Garnet uses her future vision to tell him to run to Big Donut, where he arrives just in time for their opening because they open late on Sundays. Drop Beat Dad. Steven has become Sour Cream's roadie, carrying his equipment with his gym strength and assisting him in setting up for a rave at the warehouse in spite of his stepfather Yellowtail telling him it's a waste of time. As they pass by the car wash, a massive van pulls up, and Marty emerges, shocked when he sees his son preparing for a set. Marty apologizes for not being around for so long before offering to be his promoter for his upcoming set. Marty proceeds to overhaul so much of the event, moving it to the beach for more space and buying expensive equipment and advertisements to attract more people. Steven's happy for his friend, though he does feel a little bit for Yellowtail, who's fishing alone. The concert's about to begin, and Marty offers to be the hype man for his son, stepping onto the stage where he begins peddling a new guacamole-flavored soda. This sorta disgusts the crowd and ruins the vibe, though when Sour Cream tries to tell off his father for this, he says the music industry is all about selling out for products, as it's the only way to make any real money. The concert's ruined, and Marty hands Greg an envelope he's legally required to before exiting Beach City. Then Yellowtail drives his boat up filled with his son's old equipment as he implores him to put on the show anyway. Neither of Sour Cream's fathers were especially supportive of his dreams, though they approached this from different angles. Yellowtail disliked that his son wasn't making any money off of it, that he couldn't turn it into a full-time career. But Marty wanted it to be a career for making money and nothing else, not actually caring about the music or if the boy was getting anything emotional out of it. At the end of the episode, Sour Cream tells off Marty for trying to shill a product during the show, openly rejecting a realistic opportunity to profit. Yellowtail saw this and realized that, while he was right about DJing not being a profitable enterprise, he was wrong in assuming that his son wanted to make money off it in the first place. Only after seeing somebody do something out of passion instead of monetary gain does he see the value in it. Also, Greg's envelope had a royalty check for $10 million. Mr. Greg. Greg learns that Marty sold the song he performed for Rose Courts as a burger jingle, and that his royalty checks from that, though he and Steven admit they're not exactly sure what to spend any of the money on, because all his favorite things are things he could do for free. But Steven suggests a vacation, and Greg decides they're going to go to Empire City to live the good life, and Steven suggests they bring along Pearl. This makes the trip awkward as Greg and Pearl have never really gotten along, though as they begin to enjoy the luxuries that Greg's new money can afford, she slowly comes around to the idea that they can live the good life together, though she still holds Greg at arm's length and refuses to dance with him. Oh, right, most of this episode is a musical, so most of these interactions are done via song. This means that the suits and such that they're wearing, as a tangent, Pearl looks great in a suit, are all diegetic, as are the backup singers and dancers as they are employees paid to be accompaniments. That night, as Steven and Greg are resting, Pearl begins to sing It's Over, Isn't It?, which is now my favorite song of the show, about how she is struggling to get over her loss. Not so much her loss of Rose, but her loss to Greg over her. The fact that she lost Rose's affection to someone else was at the time just a setback, as Greg was mortal. But now that Rose is gone, she can no longer just wait it out and win by attrition. The first verse of the song is about how she spent thousands of years at Rose's side, fighting in a rebellion against Homeworld by her side and then losing to a guy who plays a guitar, and worst of all is that she thinks about the relationship in terms of winning and losing, rather than people making their own decisions. All Rose ever really did was transformative. She was a gem who embraced change and fought for it, so of course the ultimate change she could make is a logical endpoint for her story to take. But personal feelings are going to win out over an ideology any time. If Pearl had her way, then Rose would still be around, but if Rose was still around, she wouldn't be Rose, but someone with less conviction. It isn't logical, but the great things in life never are. Greg and Steven hear this song and realize their presence is hurting Pearl, so Greg leaves, unsure if he can salvage his relationship with her. But Steven brought Pearl along specifically so they could have an awkward moment together, and he brings them to talk it out, singing together that Rose always did what she wanted, and arguing is not honoring her memory. Greg gets the bill from the night out and realizes that it was kind of wasted because he and Pearl could have sang together at the barn, though on the way home they continue happily talking to one another as Steven falls asleep in the back seat. Too short to ride. Steven gives a tablet computer to Peridot to make up for the earlier loss of her finger screens after she was defeated by the crystal gems. After she becomes a proper iPad kid, Amethyst and Steven invite her to Funland for a day out, though the trio are too short for any of the rides. But Amethyst and Steven recall that they can shapeshift and they stretch themselves taller, but Peridot struggles with activating her gem powers and tells them to go on without her while she sits on the computer. The Shorty squad proceeds to go around the amusement park doing various other things that require shape-shifting powers, like making faces in funhouse mirrors and cheating at the ring toss. Except, and this is pointed out in the episode, none of these require shape-shifting powers to enjoy. You can still look into mirrors and throw rings without being able to shapeshift. Peridot was just so focused on the ways she couldn't have fun and ignores all the ways she still could enjoy the park. Steven and Amethyst offer to teach Peridot how to activate her shape-shifting powers that every other gem has, but after a bit of manual stretching, she admits she has none. Homeworld was low on resources and can no longer produce gems with powers. All of the Era 2 Peridots have technology to augment their lack of powers, and now she doesn't even have that. Amethyst tries to give her a pep talk, though Peridot ignores it to look at her screen. So Amethyst takes the tablet and tosses it away, only for Perry to catch it floating above the water. She then learns she has ferrokinesis abilities, metal bending, and she celebrates this discovery by cheating at the ring toss. The new Lars. Steven watches Sadie ask Lars if he wants to hang out after work, but Lars tells her off and wonders what his other friends are up to. After he leaves, Steven asks him why he rejected Sadie, and he says that he already sees her at work and he doesn't want to see her anywhere else. That night, Steven has a dream about Lars, and when he wakes up, he's inside Lars's body inside of Lars's house. Steven, as Lars, at first wishes to respect the guy's privacy and boundaries while he gets to the bottom of what's going on, but he gets stopped by his parents who are trying to talk to him about his grades, and Steven, acting naturally, ends up satisfying them with his responses to their request. He then meets with the cool kids and begins complimenting them and being more open, which they like enough to invite him to their dance troupe. But Steven turns them down, saying he wants to spend the day with Sadie instead. Sadie isn't happy to see Lars, though, as she resents that he always does this, turns her down in public, and then tries to hang out when no one else wants to. Over a movie that Steven cries to, she asks him what he really feels, and Steven confesses his feelings. But instead of making this better, it makes things worse because Sadie doesn't accept this confession, assuming it's the beginning of a prank of sorts and kicking him out. Steven finally admits that he is Steven, and Sadie realizes that the real Lars would never have acted that way. They leave together to find Steven, or maybe Lars, assuming they've swapped bodies. The rest of Lars's family and friends follow the two, wondering what's going on, when they see Lars break into the temple and slap Steven's body around. This makes him switch back, and Steven admits to everyone he spent the day inside of Lars's body, and everything he did since that morning was not really him. This makes everyone disappointed because they liked the new Lars better, and realizing that people liked a fake version of him more than the real version makes Lars reevaluate his life if his true self is so disliked. That is, until he reconnects with Sadie, who disliked the new Lars that everyone else enjoyed the company of, which makes her his only real friend. Beach City Drift. Greg has bought a new car, this one for driving instead of living in, and Kevin, the guy who harassed Stevonnie after they first fused, pulls up and starts ordering Greg to wash his car. In spite of the guy insulting Greg a few times, the man just shrugs it off and works normally. But Steven and Connie recognize the guy from before and attempt to start an argument. After he drives away, Greg asks them what their problem was, and they explain the history. Later that night, neither of the kids can stop thinking about Kevin, so they decide to take Greg's new car to the bottom of the mountain to race him, fusing into Stevonnie to do so. After a bit of trash talking, they drive to the top of the mountain to wait for it to start, and Kevin immediately begins cheating by starting early and so on. During the race, Stevonnie asks him why he has such a bad personality, and he says it's a defense mechanism to try and make things better for his sick brother, and then laughs at the fact that Stevonnie actually fell for that story. As they continue to race, Stevonnie begins to hallucinate the road falling apart and Kevin's taillights staring at them. Then they freeze up and defuse. Steven and Connie realize they've become obsessed with one-upping some guy they barely know to the point that they fused over it. Fusion, according to the crystal gems, is meant to be something done as an expression of love rather than for some functional purpose like a fight. But here they used fusion, not because they loved one another or even wanted to defend one another, but because they were mad, and a relationship built on being mad isn't a healthy one. Stevonnie decides to fuse again and finish the race, not to beat Kevin, but because they want to have a good time driving. They end up losing, but are good-natured about it, with Kevin refusing to accept their handshake and screaming at them about how obsessed they are as Steven and Connie drive into the sunset. Restaurant Wars. When looking for something adventurous, Steven orders off-menu at the Fry Shack, and Petey finds mozzarella sticks in the freezer for him. But when Kofi sees Steven eating something made of the components of pizza, he declares the contract he had with the store next door is void, and he begins selling fries, while the Fryman family begins to sell pizza. These restaurant wars not only result in massive damage, but worse, a lot of wasted food. So Steven takes it upon himself to end these wars, as he takes the blame for starting them. He gathers the children of the restaurant owners because he recognizes they're mostly bystanders in the feud of their parents, and he tries to convince Rocknaldo and Kiki to pretend to be dating so their parents will call it off to let them be in love. This scheme almost works, except for the fact that Rocknaldo already has a girlfriend who sees him in the act and breaks up with him, revealing the ruse. Steven's next plan is to recreate the conditions of the treaty that stopped the feud so long ago by opening up a competing restaurant. This is Steven's, and he invites Mr. Fryman and Kofi to dine there, where they're wowed by the food and what it can do with cheese. Apparently, if Amethyst wants to be, she can be a great cook. After seeing how good a restaurant can be and not wanting any more competition, Fryman and Kofi end their feud if Steven's shuts down, and he agrees. Kiki's Pizza Delivery Service. Steven is preparing for a date with himself a night inside, and he sees a tired-looking Kiki running the deliveries rather than her twin sister Ginny. That night he has a dream where Kiki's drowning in a sea of cheese, and he rescues her with his dream powers. The next day, Steven sees Ginny asking Kiki if she can cover her shift again to see a concert, and Kiki agrees to do this favor. Steven then tells her about his dream and learns that Kiki had the exact same one, the same dream she has had every night for weeks, and because of Dream Steven's actions, she got a good night's sleep for once. As it turns out, the stress from taking over so many shifts for her sister has been causing her to have these nightmares, so Steven volunteers to save her from the cheese every night that he needs to. This ends up having a negative effect on his own health though, as now Steven's not getting a good night's sleep either. He tells Kiki that he's only going to save her one more time for his own health, and Kiki agrees, with the two getting to the crust of the issue as they dive inside the mind of a pizza Kiki. Once in there, they're confronted by Ginny, who keeps asking for favors, trapping her in the cheese once more. Steven points out the moral of the episode. Relationships are about boundaries, not mindlessly doing favors for one another. Even though Kiki is afraid that saying no might hurt her sister, a good and a healthy relationship ought to survive the word no being spoken occasionally. And if someone really cares about you, they'll be okay with making sure you're comfortable. This turns out to be the case as the Dream Ginny accepts Kiki's boundaries, and the next day Steven finds Ginny working her own shift as Kiki takes a day off. There's an End of Evangelion reference in this episode with giant pizzas rather than crucified artificial Eva units, and I just released an NGE video like a week before writing this part of the review, and how many members of the intended audience are even gonna get this? The Rei versus Asuka debate is older than I imagine some of the staff working on the show, let alone the kids watching. Monster Reunion. Steven heals a damaged stuffed animal with a kiss and realizes he is healing his back, showing it off to the gyms by smashing plates and such. He then asks if he can use his healing to repair the corrupted gems they've kept bubbled inside the temple, with the gems agreeing in spite of being confident it won't work because the corruption was caused by the diamonds, not typical damage. Steven repairs the centipedal and it takes on a slightly more humanoid form, with Steven convinced this means it worked, even though the gem still can't walk or behave normally. Steven lets her stay with them anyway and begins trying to bring up old memories, in spite of the fact that not all of them are pleasant ones. As he's attempting to communicate, he teaches the centipedal to make drawings to teach him about its history, and learns that the centipedal was once a gem who helped to colonize Earth until the Gem War began. At the end of this war, something involving the diamonds happened that it could not escape from, and it was turned into a corrupted gem as a result. The gem begins to transform back into its monstrous form, and Steven's unable to heal it this time. Instead, they rush to the warp pad as it asks Steven to take it to the crashed ship from Friendship, where it's unable to activate the door because it lacks hands. But Steven's able to open the ship where it rushes inside and meets with other centipedals, the gem's old crew, who've been waiting for them all along. Steven laments that he failed to save this gem from its corruption, but Garnet points out that he did save the gem anyway, not from the effect of the light from the drawing, but from the loneliness of being bubbled all alone. Because for all the concern Steven has with fixing the damage caused to the corrupted gems, some damage cannot be repaired so easily, but it can at least be adapted to. Steven fails to repair the gems, but he does heal them by allowing the centipedals to be together, and importantly, they're no longer attacking crystal gems on sight. So maybe his original goal of fixing problems wasn't possible, but he can still make things better, and that's more important. It's the concept of kintsugi, where broken pottery is fixed with gold paste to make the broken object more beautiful for having been damaged. Homeworld gems are shown to be pragmatic and emotionless at times, but the centipedal was sentimental for its missing crewmates, a behavior learned from its time on Earth. Alone at Sea. Steven surprises Lapis with a trip on a boat that Greg has rented, knowing that she still has some lingering fear of the ocean and hoping to show her once again there's nothing to be afraid of. They set sail on the Little Lappy, recently renamed for her. As they're at sea, Steven and Greg keep trying to get Lapis to participate in fun activities, but she rejects things at first, like wearing a hat or being in charge of the wheel due to believing she doesn't deserve to pilot the boat. She slowly comes around to accepting the activities the others are doing, eventually helping Greg to fish by lifting the water out of the ocean, though he tells her it's probably better to do things the normal way. When fishing the normal way, the line ends up snapping, and shortly afterwards, something breaks the ship's engine, leaving them stranded. The sky starts to darken overhead, which is usually just a fictional shorthand for a bad mood. In fiction stories, dark skies and rain never happen without a reason. Generally, this is to set the tone and happens coincidentally when we're meant to feel something negative in the narrative, but here, it's in-universe first. Lapis has the power to control water, so it makes sense she would accidentally cause storms overhead because of how she feels. And how she feels, she eventually tells Steven. She doesn't think she deserves any of the fun because she is a bad person due to enjoying the time she spent fused with Jasper. Just like Pearl manipulated Garnet into fusing before as she wanted to feel the strength that came with this fusion, Lapis enjoys the feeling of being fused even if the actual relationship was an awful one. Because she feels nostalgia for a bad time, she assumes she's a bad person for wanting to return. Then Jasper emerges from the ocean, boarding the boat and claiming the same thing. In a scene reminiscent of an emotional abuser trying to get back together with the person they hurt, Jasper promises that they've changed and things are going to be different if they fuse together. Lapis is unsure whether to believe her or not, but when she sees a hurt Steven trying to tell off Jasper, she uses her strength to throw the gem overboard. This causes enough damage to the boat to sink it, though Lapis carries Greg and Steven to safety, saying that the ocean, still stormy and cloudy, does look nice from up there. The behavior of Lapis, Pearl, and any other gem who becomes partially obsessed with fusion to the point of hurting another gem to fuse will probably be used in the future as justification for why the Homeworld gems were so against the fusion of gems who weren't already of the same kind, claiming that because fusion can be used for ill purposes, it ought to be strongly controlled and forbidden outside of specific use cases, all the while ignoring the potential for greatness that the other crystal gems have found when it comes to what they can do when they aren't repressed in such a way. Greg the Babysitter. Steven learns that Greg has been working at the car wash for longer than he's been alive and asks his father to sing the story of how he got the job, flashing back to a montage of Greg and Rose spending time together shortly after they met. This montage of the two ends with Greg eating fry bits out of trash cans and realizing that he needs money to buy food to live, unlike his new lover. He heads to Vidalia's house to mooch cereal and a couch from her, talking about her being a sellout for taking a job selling t-shirts so that she can settle down and pay for baby sour cream's well-being. She then learns that her babysitter canceled and she needs a new one on short notice, telling Greg he has to take care of the kid to pay her back for her hospitality. So Greg goes to the beach with baby sour cream where he meets with Rose, and she wonders if the baby was made by Greg, not understanding a lot of things about how humans work, but mostly being amazed with the fact that they can change and grow on purpose. Homeworld gems come out of the ground fully formed, with their purpose in life already figured out, while humans don't know that and learn what they want to do over time. Part of the reason why Rose loves humanity so much is because she is fascinated by them, seeing that there's a way to live one's life aside from the demands of the matriarch she grew up under. Greg is then inspired by her observations and leaves to get his guitar to go write a song about it, but when he returns, Rose is gone, as is the baby. He finds her at the amusement park where Sour Cream has climbed up the Ferris wheel, with Rose letting him do this because he wanted to. She appreciates that humans can make their own choices in this way, but doesn't understand the limitations to this, That even though humans can do whatever they want to, it doesn't mean that they should. In order to truly make your own decisions in life, you need to be informed of the risk associated with those decisions. This is true whether it's a baby climbing up high, or Greg doing the same thing and needing to be rescued, eventually learning that, no matter how old you are, you sometimes still need others to help out in a bind. And this is how Greg comes to the conclusion that he needs to find a job, returning baby sour cream to his mother, and then heading to the car wash, where he's been working ever since, even writing the first few verses of "Let Me Drive My Van Into Your Heart" as he's washing a car. Gym Hunt. Connie is sent on her first mission up north to find and bubble a corrupted gym Garnet's detected in the area. They find this corrupted gym and prepare to fight it when a second one appears, and the two run off, splitting up. Pearl's prepared to call off this mission, but Connie reassures her that they can split up and handle it too, with Steven giving each group a Cookie Cat walkie-talkie so they can call each other. Pearl accepts the two going off on their own, but makes them promise to call her if they find this gym. Connie and Steven follow the tracks for a while, with Pearl checking up on them over and over, concerned for their safety. But when they come into a clearing where they see remnants of a struggle, as well as humanoid footprints in the clearing, Steven tells Connie that deep down, he knows that each corrupted gym has a human form inside, and that he wishes that he could bring that gym form out to undo the corruption, suspecting that that is what's going on. After Connie uses her survival skills to prove them a T as they take shelter, they emerge from a stump to find this corrupted gym clawing at a cliff, alerted when it hears Pearl's voice through the walkie-talkie. It attacks them only for the duo to be saved by Jasper. She wrestles the beast into submission and then grabs the gym from inside, taunting Steven, who she calls Rose, before leaving. Pearl arrives around this time, shocked at the sight of Jasper before she leaves. She asks the others if they're okay, but Connie's upset that she froze up during the fight rather than winning it. Pearl points out, however, that Connie was successful, as her mission was not to fight the beast, but to call for help, which she did. Back when Pearl first taught Connie to wield a sword, her lessons ended not on making constant physical sacrifices to protect your liege, but to work together with them in order to form a stronger unit, and that lesson is still present here. It's not about being strong enough to do everything by yourself, but being strong enough to support your allies to do anything together. Crack the Whip. Garnet and Pearl head out to keep searching for Jasper, missing out on a swordplay lesson of Connie's due to the ongoing emergency. Connie is still upset that she froze up during the last episode and wishes she had more training to give her better instincts. So she and Steven practice fighting on the beach while Amethyst watches them and takes a nap. She explains that Connie's too focused on technique and details, and that during a real fight there's no time for that sort of thing. So Amethyst takes over the lesson, attempting to teach the others to relax over a montage of the three of them, and also Lion, messing around in Beach City that ends with them on the beach, Connie finally unwinding from her earlier stiffness. Then Jasper and the gym beasts from earlier emerge from the water, announcing that she's producing her own army and is ready to fight. Amethyst offers to fight Jasper directly while the others deal with the beast. During this fight, Jasper points out the similarities between the two. Both are living weapons created to fight. Amethyst is simply a weapon that has defied its programming to be a soul instead. But in doing this, she's also rejected a part of her identity, meaning that no matter what else she does, it won't be her true purpose in life to do it. Amethyst ends up getting overpowered and poofed during the fight, so Steven and Connie rush Jasper to avenge her. They do this by forming Stevani and using this fusion's power to defeat Jasper with ease, demanding that she apologize to Amethyst's gym. There's a quick parallel during the fight where Jasper rides her corrupted beast as Stevani is on Lion, both being injured in a clash. Jasper literally throws her pet back into the battle, while Stevani checks to see that Lion is okay first. Amethyst reforms in time to see Jasper slinking away defeated, and frets over the fact that she didn't help out at all despite trying to teach the others how to fight. Her purpose in life is to fight, and she's not even good at that. Steven versus Amethyst. Steven is about to start more training with Pearl when he sees Amethyst stress eating, so he invites her along. Amethyst accepts, admitting to herself she needs to train more after being defeated by Jasper last episode. Pearl takes this as an opportunity to have them practice against one another, rewarding them with Pearl points for their victories. But during this training, Steven keeps winning, with Pearl assuming that Amethyst is going easy on him, but she's getting more and more frustrated by her losses. Later on, Steven invites her to play Lonely Blade together, throwing matches on purpose to cheer her up, which only makes Amethyst even angrier as her confidence building for Steven was done accidentally. She admits how insufficient she feels compared to the others, and that she has become the weakest of the crystal gems, though Steven argues that he's the weakest due to not having full control over his powers. So they challenge each other to a lose-off to fight and learn who the worst crystal gem really is. Both fighters surprise each other during this battle with new techniques and trickery, also saving one another each, as if to drive home the fact that they do work better together than apart. Considering the number of anime references Steven Universe has made thus far, I was expecting the fight to end with the cross-counter punch, but more thematically it ends with them missing and falling over. While lying on the ground, Amethyst and Steven open up about the fact that they're only comparing themselves to one another as they're trying to avoid the real comparison, comparing themselves to their potential. Steven wants to live up to the name of Rose Quartz, but so far has only managed to relearn her old powers, while Amethyst is an unfinished kindergartner who will never be as strong as she is supposed to be due to what's treated by the narrative as a disability, one no amount of working hard can ever erase. Bismuth. While putting away a t-shirt so Lion can't tear it up, Steven discovers a bubbled gem inside his mane, accidentally breaking this bubble and seeing a new gem emerge. After a bit of nervous scouting, Steven realizes that this gem, unlike almost every other one he's met, is not trying to kill him and is friendly, bringing her back to the temple where Pearl and Garnet introduce their old friend Bismuth. Bismuth was bubbled thousands of years ago during the middle of the Gem War, and takes a bit of time to get used to the changes, like Rose Quartz's new form as Steven. She's taken to the battlefield where Pearl explains that they were technically victorious because the Homeworld gems fled the planet, though many of their allies didn't make it. Garnet mentions that they're still fighting, and Bismuth is eager to begin training again for these battles. She takes them to her forge inside of a volcano, showing off several weapons she's made for the other gems before offering to test them out on the beach. This is where Steven first begins to grow suspicious of her as he sees just how violent Bismuth is during these fights, clearly enjoying combat a bit too much. So Steven offers an alternative pre-battle ritual, eating pizza and playing video games. That night, he shows Bismuth Rose's sword, and he says that most of his weapons are for defense instead of offense. The two discuss how Rose Quartz was the first person to tell Bismuth that she could be anything other than a mindless drone performing construction for the elite of society. The fact that Steven is Steven instead of Rose shows the commitment to change that she embodied. Because Rose is different now, Bismuth offers to show Steven a weapon that she worked on before, called the Breaking Point. This weapon differs from Rose's sword, as Rose's sword is designed to slash through gems in a single blow, while being unable to shatter the gems themselves. The Breaking Point is able to shatter gems completely, though. Steven hates the idea of shattering gems, saying that he never wants to completely wipe out any life form as he refuses to kill if he can avoid doing so. Bismuth realizes that Steven really is Rose, and this means that he has the same faults that caused Rose to bubble her in secret millennia ago. She then attacks Steven, seeking revenge against the gem who refused her powerful weapon all that time back, even though it would have won the war more easily. Steven's able to win the fight, refusing to shatter Bismuth despite being asked to, and then bubbling her once again, but unlike before, Steven immediately tells the truth about her to the other gems rather than hiding what she wanted to do. There's an idea that the ends justify the means of any conflict, which means that it's okay to take extreme measures in a conflict as long as you win. But to focus so much on the end goal that you ignore the path to get there is a mistake, as the path to get there is the path you continue on after you succeed. You don't just achieve your goals and stop. A legacy that's built upon violence will create a dynasty built upon violence. So many shows will have a moral like, if you kill your enemies, it makes you just like them. That these days is treated with an eye roll from the audience because it usually just means the protagonist will cut his way through minions, then stop at the last second to spare the villain so that he can escape and cause mayhem in the next episode. But I feel like Steven Universe does this trope really well due to the fact that there is much more intentionality behind each character's actions. Steven has been visibly uncomfortable during gym fights in the past when the battle lasts more than a few strikes, and he's always the one to jump in between the crystal gyms and the gym of the week if he thinks they can be redeemed. So Bismuth is introduced as a foil to the pacifist ideology of the other crystal gyms, one who's on the same side but more willing to treat others the way they've been treated, which makes them no different, and that's naughty cliché. Beta. Amethyst is struggling to use her whip properly as she is overthinking her actions after losing her earlier fight to Jasper, so Steven takes her to the barn to meet with Lapis and Peridot to cheer her up. They arrive to see that the barn's been overhauled with new features, wings, and a collection of art which they call Meep Morps. Amethyst doesn't understand the point of these morphs as they don't make her any stronger, but Peridot tries to reassure Amethyst that she shouldn't be comparing herself to the other gym because Jasper's kindergarten was a poorly made one, revealing both of them are from Earth. So all of them, but Lapis, go to the Beta kindergarten, which Peridot explains is something made in a rush in the middle of Rose's rebellion to quickly make new soldiers, and most of the new soldiers came out wrong or malformed. They eventually find Jasper's hole, but unlike the others, this one is perfect. This only makes Amethyst more upset as her current enemy came from a worse background and made more of herself than Amethyst, who had a nicer background but ended up in her eyes flawed. Then they notice several other holes that are new, learning that these holes are where the gym beasts they've been fighting recently are coming from. Shortly afterwards, they find the culprit behind the newly used injections, Jasper. Peridot, Amethyst, and Steven watch Jasper as she talks to one of the corrupted gym beasts inside the Beta kindergarten, and that is a lot of proper nouns for an opening sentence, where they see her discussing how bad it is to be on Earth, evidenced by the corruption of the beast. Peridot plans to leave to get reinforcements, but Amethyst decides to sneak in, only to be immediately caught. Jasper and Amethyst start fighting, with Amethyst refusing to allow the others to assist her because she wants to settle this herself. But Amethyst is losing, with Jasper explaining during the fight that every gym is made with a purpose, and those who don't serve the purpose made for them by the diamonds are unfit for any sort of life. So both Amethyst and Jasper are misfits in the sense that Amethyst was formed incorrectly, while Jasper came out right, but then failed to perform her role, meaning that to her, they both have the same lack of success. Amethyst believes in this too, as she is trying to measure her usefulness objectively. It's Steven who assures her that this isn't the right way to live one's life though, as constantly aiming to measure your success by an arbitrary metric means that you'll dedicate yourself to one thing and miss out on living. Funnily enough, it's actually Peridot who comes to the defense of Earth by using the moral of surviving versus thriving, because this was a lesson she learned at the end of last season. To simply obey orders might guarantee survival, but then you're not living for a reason. Steven adds on to the idea by saying that it's their failures to fit in that make them all unique, and that being unique is what makes them valuable. Of course, a person who only values themselves based on what they think they can do would consider uniqueness as a flaw. This pep talk causes Amethyst to accept the help of Steven, and when she pulls him in for a hug, the two of them form Jones-Qaurtey, a fusion who fights with a yo-yo and childish sense of humor. Jones-Qaurtey is able to turn the tides of battle, with Jasper complaining that she has once again been defeated by a fusion. So she forces one of the captured gym beasts to fuse with her, making a more monstrous form that's not at all more powerful, being defeated just as easily as earlier. This is another advantage of being on Earth and living with the crystal gems, because they're not so focused on fitting in or serving a higher purpose, they can learn more about themselves and their abilities, like Peridot, learning that she can move metal, or even the discovery of fusion with other gem types. After defusing, parts of the gem beast still exist on Jasper as she writhes in pain. Steven approaches, offering to heal her with his powers, but she turns him down, saying that Jones-Qaurtey is a terrible gem who only takes in desperate gems who are at their lowest. She also says she wants revenge for what she did to Pink Diamond before getting poofed. They return to the barn, excited to properly unwind, when they see Pearl, Garnet, and Lapis in the process of bubbling the rubies from before. Back to the moon. The gems reunite at the barn where the rubies are being bubbled, with Steven preparing to interrogate them one at a time. The rubies seem to struggle to remember why they were actually on Earth until they're all unbubbled, at which point they recall they're after Jasper, and they're mad because Steven lied about her being on Neptune. Not wanting to cooperate with the Homeworld gems, Amethyst shapeshifts into Jasper, pretending to be her where the rubies are in awe to finally meet someone they consider to be a hero. Amethyst pretends that the rest of the crystal gems are her prisoners and that she wants to remain on Earth instead of reporting to Yellow Diamond about the mission. So the Garnets say that they ought to report to the nearest Diamond base, which is on the moon, so they can file a report on the mission anyway. They take the ship up to the moon, bringing along the temple gems, as Amethyst doesn't want to be left alone because she's starting to struggle to hold the form for much longer. Once on the moon base, the rubies begin to lament the history of the place, as they discuss how Rose Quartz shattered Pink Diamond, the original owner of the Earth colony. Steven takes exception to this, saying that he knows Rose would never shatter another gem as that isn't the type of person she was. Pearl seems to know more than she lets on, but covers her mouth to avoid saying it. They arrive at the top of the base, where the console Peridot was showing off on their last visit is smashed, saying they'll have to return to Homeworld to report directly. An exhausted Amethyst tells them to make this report on her behalf, taking advantage of how much the rubies look up to her to manipulate them into leaving without her. But they come back to offer her a ride to Earth first, where they catch Amethyst no longer maintaining the form. And this is when they realize they've been fooled again, fusing and preparing to fight. But Steven opens the airlock to force them out, with Sardonyx performing the final hit to push her through, then defuse. But Pearl is pulled out into space with them as the episode ends. Bubbled. Steven is floating through space, having bubbled himself in time to preserve a bit of oxygen to keep himself afloat, pun intended. He then runs into Eyeball, one of the rubies named for the position of her gem, and she announces her hatred of Steven for getting them stranded in space together as her platoon was scattered. After this argument is over, Eyeball tells Steven that she was excited to visit Earth due to the rumors that there were still active crystal gems there, and that these rumors had to have been true because someone as important as Jasper was sent. She really wanted to find out if Rose Quartz was still alive and to see her in person, so Steven tells Eyeball that he is Rose Quartz, or at least what she's become. But Eyeball is too mistrusting of anything the crystal gems tell her, as they've lied to her so many times before. Steven attempts to show off his gem, shield, and some pictures of Rose for comparison, but Eyeball's still not swayed by any of this. It isn't until they enter a field of asteroids where Eyeball has her gem cracked by an incoming rock that Steven's able to prove he does have healing powers by using his spit to repair the gem. This is enough to convince Eyeball that Steven is his mother, and she pulls out a knife and prepares to steal the gem to bring back to Homeworld. According to her logic, she'll be a hero if she manages to do this, and Steven's taken aback by wondering what he is if not for the gem in his stomach. He pleads with her not to stab him, but when Eyeball doesn't listen, he drops the bubble and she floats off into space. Steven nearly passes out from a lack of oxygen when he gets rescued by the ship from before, piloted by the other 3 gems, who all hug Steven as they're glad he's alive. As they return to Earth, Steven asks them if it's true that Rose Quartz really did shatter one of the diamonds in the past. Garnet says she did what she had to do. Sometimes it's more important to protect others than it is to stick to your ideals. There's an interesting idea brought up here about how Steven doesn't actually know Rose Quartz very well. Obviously he's never met her before, but was constantly told that he was meant to live up to her ideals, something he believed he was doing a good job of until recently. As he is starting to learn more and more about her though, he realizes that she was not the perfect person the other gems described her as, and that she's made missteps and hypocritical actions in the past. But worse is that since Steven's trying so hard to live up to the ideals of a person he does not know, it means that he's trying to be less like himself and more like someone he also doesn't know. Basically the lyrics to the ending theme. Kindergarten Kid. The crystal gems are back at the Beta Kindergarten, fighting and bubbling the corrupted gems Jasper was keeping prisoner in the walls. Peridot's laughing at these gems as, once freed, they tend to charge about aimlessly, occasionally even beating their way past the others. The others offer Peridot the chance to capture a corrupted gem herself, and Steven goes with her, not to help out Peridot, but to help out the gem. He views the methods of Garnet, Amethyst, and Pearl as more gentle, While this means that the corruptions occasionally get away from them, it also reduces the potential unnecessary suffering. So Peridot, who has less sympathy for the beasts, might end up going too far in her attempts to capture one, which is why Steven goes along. This is even reinforced by the fact that corrupted gems are explained to be an Earth-exclusive problem because Homeworld doesn't have anything like them. Afterwards, Coyote has various increasingly silly attempts to capture the Roadrunner gem that more or less all result in her getting smushed by a boulder, or falling off of a cliff and then smushed by a boulder. That night, Peridot's discussing how frustrated she is that she keeps getting one-upped by a mindless monster, but Steven convinces her that this monster's behavior is actually logical, by throwing marshmallows at Perry until she lashes out at him, the same thing the corrupted gem is doing in response to her pursuit. Now with a better appreciation of what the monsters are going through, Peridot approaches the Roadrunner and begins making monster noises and dancing at it, getting close enough to attack it anyway, where she is dragged back down to the cliff. She does manage to grab the gem in the end when the rest of the crystal gems come out, revealing they were watching all along. Peridot admits that she had a few minor setbacks before discovering she is able to bubble gems too, sending it safely back to the barn. Know Your Fusion. Steven and Amethyst are excited to tell Garnet and Pearl about the details regarding their defeat of Jasper, namely that they can now fuse into smoky quartz. The other gems are so excited about this new fusion that they form Sardonyx, offering Sardonyx's room in the temple to better show off their new abilities. Sardonyx's room being something that only exists while Garnet and Pearl are fused, which both raises and answers a few questions about the existence of Rose's room. Once here, Sardonyx proceeds to show off this new fusion in a talk show format, asking Smoky Quartz about their fight with Jasper, but then following this up with more detailed questions about who Smoky Quartz is, rather than simply asking about the power set. But Smoky struggles to answer these questions, so instead they return to a showcase of their powers, with a series of tests set up to show off what they can do relative to the other fusions. Naturally, Smoky Quartz struggles to show off the strength of Sugilite, the accuracy of Opal, or the raw power of Alexandrite, all of whom are fusions involving Amethyst. Realizing that the fusion showcase was focused too much on other people and not enough on Smoky Quartz in particular, Sardonyx realizes that they were not giving proper attention to the guest on their show. Then, they defuse, causing the realm to collapse in on itself. Smoky Quartz is able to save everybody by using their yo-yo as a grappling hook, and Garnet and Pearl are amazed at this ability, offering to properly allow Steven and Amethyst to explain their powers on their own terms, rather than living up to the ideals of someone else. This is, of course, the thing that made Steven and Amethyst fuse in the first place. They both bonded over the fact that they considered themselves failures, but only when compared to the other gems in their lives. Once they stopped trying to measure their strength in terms defined by other people, they got to set their own ideals for what success looks like. Only then did this fusion manage to thrive. Buddy's Book. Steven and Connie visit the local library as Connie wants to get a head start on her next year's worth of studies. Plus, she's a little concerned Steven's never been to a library before, despite being an avid reader. As Steven is messing around, he discovers a blank book under a shelf, revealed to be the journals of Buddy, the first mate from the Founders myth back in Historical Friction. Steven and Connie proceed to read this together, imagining that Buddy looks like Jamie because he was the one who taught them about the guy, and they learn that he feared his name would be forgotten by history, or he would just be remembered as someone more famous's first mate. So Buddy set out to explore the world and record his adventures, coming across the gem battlefield that's now overrun with strawberries before encountering Garnet and Pearl. They warn him that these old gem sites are dangerous and give him a map of places not to visit. Then Buddy proceeds to visit as many of them as he can. Buddy marks down several of these locations and draws what he finds there, only to meet with Amethyst, who points out that he hasn't actually discovered anything because he's just following someone else's map. All he's done is show up to a place that already has a name, get the name wrong, then pretend he was the first one there. Upon his realization, Buddy has a crisis, only to be reassured by Amethyst he can still explore a new place if he seeks out the Sandcastle, the one that keeps moving around. Buddy enters the desert, slowly succumbing to heat before collapsing on the ground and being saved by Rose Quartz, who hears his explanation for this exploration before showing him where the castle is. This doesn't cheer him up, as once again, he's merely finding things others have already discovered. Rose reassures him though, saying that although he is yet to find anything new, he was able to record everything that he found in a unique and transformative way. Effectively, he did to these gym sites what I'm doing to the show itself. And he rededicates his life to recording his adventures and creating a library out of his books. This is the library Steven and Connie are inside of. Mindful Education. Connie comes to the temple for another training session, but mentally she isn't all there, missing the punchlines to Steven's jokes and getting distracted from the fighting. After having a vision of a young boy, Stefani defuses and Connie runs away, telling Steven that she freaked out at school and threw a kid to the ground out of instinct. Garnet hears the two talking about this and tells them that they cannot properly fuse if one of them has a cloudy mind, walking Steven and Connie through some mindfulness meditation to the tune of the song Here Comes a Thought. For those familiar with mindfulness cognitive behavioral therapy, the ideas in this song will be more obvious, but for those who use YouTube instead of therapy, the idea is that the more you avoid a thought, the more it controls you. To constantly prevent yourself from thinking about it is like procrastinating on a task for so long that it ruins your ability to do anything else. Eventually, you have to confront these feelings, so it's just a matter of when and where these thoughts become overwhelming. Stefani is forced to confront a feeling that Connie was putting off processing in the middle of a training match. And later, Steven began to feel guilt over his failure to save Bismuth, Jasper, or Eyeball, as well as the fact that he's been putting off a confrontation with the truth of who his mother really was. And because these negative thoughts came about at a bad time, Stefani ends up slipping off the top of an arena. Maybe it was a bad idea to put a practice ground at the top of a floating platform, but whatever. As Stefani recently learned that they can float a bit, Connie asks Steven to refuse with her so they don't hit the ground too hard. But Steven is caught in his own mind, unable to fuse with her. So Connie reminds him of Garnet's lessons that they weren't just for her, and the two are able to recreate that scene from Laputa, fusing safely before landing down below. Future Boy Zoltron. Mr. Smiley installs a new fortune teller machine in front of the arcade and Steven tries it out, getting a few non-answers before accidentally breaking the machine with a pat on the back. Mr. Smiley orders Steven to pretend to be the robot inside the machine to pay him back for its destruction, so Steven dons the costume and begins to give out advice. He does this by using his knowledge of the people of Beach City, telling Sadie that Lars really likes it when people rely on him even if he pretends not to care, while Sadie prefers to be in charge but appreciates the effort of people trying to ease her burdens. After several more fortunes, Steven begins to feel good that he's made a positive change in a lot of people's lives. Then, a frowning man pouts up to the machine and starts asking Steven a series of questions about his life. Steven, not knowing this man, gives him some platitudes that he rejects, pouting even more. So Steven asks Garnet for some future vision to help out the stranger, but in spite of seeing multiple futures for the guy, all of them involve being sad in some way, and Steven admits this much to him. Steven then tells of this encounter to Mr. Smiley, learning that the two used to be members of a comedy duo where Smiley would play off of Mr. Frowny's bits together, though the other guy always took his miserable persona off stage with them. Steven then looks into the future again, looking into possible outcomes of their reunion and seeing that once again, all of them end with Mr. Frowny being miserable. But Steven says they ought to meet up again anyway in spite of this, and Mr. Smiley rushes to the reunion. They meet up again and, as Steven predicted, Mr. Frowny is still sad. But Mr. Smiley reminds him of their old routine, which finally brings a real smile to the other guy's face after he gets the joke. Mr. Smiley admits that he didn't really care much about the routine and just wanted the other guy to have fun, but Mr. Frowny would always overcommit, bringing down his friend without realizing it. Once they see each other from another point of view, they make up because they now accept the differences instead of avoiding them. Last one out of Beach City. Greg cancels on a Mike Kroll concert he was planning on attending with Amethyst due to a prior obligation, leaving her stuck at home with Pearl and Steven while they do a puzzle. But when she points out how boring this is, Pearl declares she'll go to the concert to prove she is cool, donning a jacket and jeans and preparing for a road trip with the others. As they're stocking up on drinks at Big Donut, a woman with pink hair comes in, with Pearl getting flustered at the sight of her. Amethyst and Steven encourage Pearl to talk to this woman, but she merely drops coffee on the ground and says nothing. Later on, they're driving to the concert as Steven points out how similar this woman looked to Rose Quartz, but Pearl insists that there's no connection, until they see her again, pulling up beside them on a motorcycle. Amethyst tries to play wingman to tell her when to look over and signal her, but they still don't have much of an interaction before she pulls away while the car is stuck at a red light. Pearl then decides that she's done being lame and she runs the light, speeding down the road before catching the attention of a police car that starts chasing them. Steven tells her to pull over, but Pearl refuses, speeding faster before losing the cop behind a billboard. Then they realize they're out of gas and Pearl breaks down, saying that all she wanted to do was show that she was cool to the others, and she ended up in a car chase after failing twice to talk to someone else. As they head down the road toward the nearest gas station, they hear loud noises and find out they broke down near the concert, and that the woman Pearl failed to talk to is there. She decides that she's going to speak to her for real this time and is successful, but Steven and Amethyst can't hear the actual conversation. Pearl's concern during this episode is that she doesn't come across as cool to the others, and that they think less of her because of this. At least, that's the surface-level interpretation of her insecurities. Deep down, what she's unsure about is the fact that cool people tend to be those who can get along with others easily, and Pearl's too reserved and cut off from the rest of the world. She cites her past experience at fighting against the Homeworld gyms as proof that she is a rebel, yet for all the rebellion she did, she's barely taken advantage of any of what she has fought for. Rose Quartz loved humanity, but it's hard to say you love humanity when you barely bother interacting with it. In the end, Pearl gets the phone number of this woman, though she's not sure what to do with it because she doesn't have a phone. Amethyst points out how amazing it is that she succeeded at social interaction, despite mentioning her hair is a construct of light and she saved the planet, which reassures Pearl that she is cool because she's now social. Onion Gang. Steven is narrating Onion's life as the two hang out together, but when it's time to go, Steven wonders if Onion has any other friends his age, fretting that he must be lonely. Onion hears the narration and drags Steven into the woods, where he's introduced to several other, mostly non-verbal kids, all named after foodstuffs, and they proceed to show off how they have fun. This involves riding around on a cart they built together, faking car accidents, flashing random people, as in flash photography, and then racing bugs. But when Steven's bug wins and they give him a hammer to smash the beetle, Steven refuses and runs away, hoping to play with more normal people. But all of Steven's other friends are busy with the end of summer activities, making him realize that he's the boy with no friends his age. Onion enters the temple and gives Steven his living bug back, calling Steven back into the woods where he sees the Onion Gang packing up their things and showing him a brown leaf, the sign of the beginning of fall. Steven realizes that Onion's friends are just the kids who live in Beach City during the summer, but he reassures the kid he'll be fine during the school year because they'll still have each other. Gem Harvest. Steven goes to the barn to meet with Lapis and Peridot, where he sees that they've grown a personal army of vegetables to command, not understanding that vegetables aren't sentient. So Steven licks a pumpkin seed to give them a pet pumpkin that likes him at first, until it watches him disembowel another pumpkin to make a jack-o'-lantern. Then a plane flies overhead, followed by screaming in anger. Andy, upset that his family's barn has been taken over and remade by who he assumes are squatters. Steven calls Greg over and the rest of the gyms to explain the situation, but Andy still isn't happy. Not only because there are strangers living in his barn, but because his cousin Greg knew about this and never told him. Their last interaction was about 20 years ago, and he hasn't heard from the guy ever since. Andy mentions the sentimental value that the barn has, how it used to be a place where the DeMaio family gathered. Greg's original last name was DeMaio and he changed it to Universe, which gives Steven the idea to throw an old-style family gathering to prove they can still do family stuff. They never call it Thanksgiving. All the gyms work together to put on this feast, mostly, and they begin cooking using a grill made from the old plane engine inside the barn. Andy is once again furious about this as it's a family heirloom being repurposed outside of its original intent, though Steven defends the device by saying that it's been given a second life and new purpose to something that was abandoned. Pearl and Lapis come up with several human things to do together, like a wedding, and a birthday, and a funeral, and as they sit around the table discussing the time they saved the Earth, Andy leaves in his plane after saying that they can have the barn. The conflict in this episode comes from Andy's more conservative values versus the life the Crystal Gems have made for themselves. While it's never explicitly said, there are some pretty heavy-handed metaphors made with his speech and his mannerisms, specifically that he calls them aliens and is upset that Greg never had a traditional marriage. And while it would be easy for the writers to have created a stereotype of a guy, then spend the runtime of the episode saying that he's an idiot and making fun of him, Steven Universe does not take this approach, instead making a comparison between the life he lives and the ideals of some of the Homeworld gems. A good example is the family's old plane, repurposed into a grill. Andy is upset that it was deconstructed in this way, but it was also sitting in a pile of junk for years. The only value the plane had was in the sentimental value, or associated memories. These memories still exist, though, now that the parts of it are useful in another way and making new memories, instead of just being a trophy to commemorate something in the past. This is not to say that things in the past are only meant to be rebuilt into other things, though. Andy leaves during the feast after he realizes that he no longer fits into the world he helped build. This is partially by his own designs. He owns a plane and could have flown back to visit whenever he wanted to, but valued his freedom too much to return home. If he doesn't care about where he came from enough to visit, then he doesn't have much of a right to dictate how things ought to be. But this has less to do with him not caring and more to do with an assumption that the old world will stay the old world forever. If you love something, it's understandable to wish it would never change at all, but if you love somebody, then it's necessary to wish the best for them, and this usually means letting them change. In the end, Steven has Lapis fly him to catch up to Andy, where he asks his uncle to come back to the barn with the rest of them. Andy saves Steven from a fall into the ocean, saying he regrets not learning that he existed sooner as they return to the feast with the others. Andy saying the one thing that he knows is true, that he missed his cousin. 3 gems and a baby. Greg and the Crystal Gems are inside the temple during a snowstorm, remembering the last big snowstorm to have blown in 14 years ago when Steven was a baby. Steven asks Greg to sing the story of this storm, and he flashes back to a moment where he was staying in Vidalia's vacant house while trying his best to take care of baby Steven. The other 3 gems arrive at the house to drop off gifts for the baby, but these are mostly inappropriate because none of them understands what a baby is, just like the way that Rose once struggled to tell the difference between a baby human and a fully grown one. Once they've all gathered around exchanging gifts, Steven's gem begins to glow brightly, and none of them knows exactly what this means will happen. This isn't just because of the glowing, though, as Greg isn't sure whether this is something babies normally do either. He leaves to grab a parenting book from Vidalia, only to find Steven and the gems missing, stealing his van and driving off, with Greg chasing after them on foot. The gems spend some time trying to figure out what's going on with Steven or what it is that he wanted. Although Greg wasn't sure how to raise Steven, the gems know even less as they assume Steven is just Rose in another form. Amethyst thinks that baby Steven just wants to shapeshift but can't remember how to do so, while Garnet is convinced that baby Steven is a fusion, and Rose is trying to unfuse but struggling. Neither of these attempts works, so Pearl takes over, attempting to remove the gem from Steven's belly, but stopping herself when she remembers that Rose wanted this and she should not go against her wishes. Greg finally catches up to the others, shivering and cold, with the 5 of them recreating some biblical imagery as they realize that no one has any idea what to do with Steven, but that was the point of Rose's decision to pass on her gemstone, to make something entirely new, not a human like Greg, but not a gem like the crystals. Rose has mentioned before that humans are capable of doing anything they want to, having no real purpose at first, but growing into this role over time. Gems are the opposite, starting out fully formed with their purpose immediately achievable. The Crystal Gems don't really know this, though. The first whole season is a series of Steven making mistakes because he was never told anything about how the world works. This episode adds context to that dynamic. Baby Steven was incapable of doing anything at all due to being a baby, and since the Crystal Gems haven't really figured out that babies can grow, they still treat Steven like a child as they're unaware that he can become a more responsible person as he gets older. It is a messy process as they don't know what they're doing, and some of their actions are informed by a loyalty to Rose first, rather than an attempt to understand her. Steven's dream. Steven has a dream of a field of flowers and wakes up near his father with tears in his eyes. He asks Greg about his mom, specifically if she ever mentioned the name Pink Diamond. But Greg says that while they talked about a lot of things, that never came up. The next night, Steven has another dream about the place where he finds a pink palanquin in the field. Remembering this from Buddy's journal, Steven has Connie bring the book over where they find that it was one of the gem sites he mapped out in the past. They ask the crystal gems to take them to the site, but they refuse, causing Steven to get upset that they never consider what he wants, hiding things from him for his own safety while ignoring his emotional needs about his mother. He attempts to leave but gets stopped by Garnet one more time, who said that she doesn't want Steven to go because she can't go with him. This only makes him want to check it out even more. So Steven asks Greg if he knows how to get to Korea where the palanquin remains, and Greg calls Andy over to fly them across the sea. After spending a bit of time as tourists, they finally arrive at the hill where the palanquin should be, blocked off by a fence that Greg helps Steven hop over, similar to the fence from Story for Steven as well as Lars and the Cool Kids. And then they climb the hill where they find an intact blue palanquin, as well as a figure hunched over and crying. Steven starts crying as well, notifying a Pearl who approaches the bushes they're using for cover. To avoid being caught, Greg pops out and pretends to be a lost tourist. The Pearl leads him to the tall figure, a gem with a blue diamond on her chest, and she tells him about how she is mourning the loss of Pink Diamond. So Greg asks her a bit about her, also opening up about how he is mourning the loss of someone close to him, and that the feelings are hard to live with, careful not to imply the two are related. Blue Diamond is amazed at the resilience of humanity, to not only understand her feelings, but to survive on a planet that's about to be destroyed by the cluster. She's so amazed, in fact, that she grabs Greg and prepares to take him away, hopping into another ship shaped like a giant hand that blasts off before Steven can float up to reach it. He is caught by Garnet, who apologizes for being too scared to come before, and Steven tells her about Greg's kidnapping. So Garnet says they're going to space. Adventures in Light Distortion. Steven and Garnet return to the temple where they tell the others that Blue Diamond has kidnapped Greg. Pearl tries to think of where he might have been taken and recalls that Pink Diamond used to have a human zoo to show off her trophies of Earth's conquest, people taken from their families. Steven wants to get there as soon as possible, so he has Peridot prepare the Wandering Eye ship the rubies arrived on for another spaceflight, though he rushes her through the process rather than allowing her to properly calibrate it. They hop aboard and take off, flying through space where they ram into the rubies along the way, wondering if they ought to do something about them floating in Earth's orbit. Steven says there's no time and asks about their arrival time, which Pearl, still not having a normal comprehension of linear time, says will only take 70 years. But humans don't live that long, so Steven searches for ways to go faster, recalling Peridot mentioning a gravity engine that could bend reality to make them arrive sooner. Pearl warns Steven it might squish him, but Steven accepts the risk and activates it. He isn't squished, but the other gems are, becoming compressed down to shortened forms that they can't shapeshift out of. Steven realizes that this is because the ship is calibrated for the rubies, so he attempts to recalibrate the ship to better accommodate other sizes. This only results in him randomly shuffling their sizes around for a while, before finally turning off calibration entirely. And this makes the gems revert to their gem form, as the ship speeds up enough that Steven is compressed into the chair. All alone and with no allies, he realizes that the ship is about to crash into the zoo, and he can't move to stop it. This makes Steven realize that he was wrong to rush into saving his father, that even though his intentions were pure, it would have been wiser to go more slowly rather than risking so much in the rescue mission. He manages to conjure enough strength to stop the ship just in time, with the gems catching up to it afterwards. As it turns out, without calibration and the ship moving faster than light, the gems simply lagged behind the ship as it was moving faster than they could project themselves. They forgive Steven for his enthusiasm and then watch Pink Diamond's zoo from a distance. Gem Heist. The crystal gems land inside the hangar of the human zoo, only to see Amethyst guards protecting the door as they realize they have no way past them. So Garnet defuses and offers them an unconventional way to get by, pretending to play the roles they were meant to blend in. Steven acts like Esteban Universidad, which is closer to Steven University, but that's probably the joke, as the others are the bodyguards for Sapphire, taking a human to the zoo as an offering. Once inside, they meet Holly Blue Agate as she scolds the Amethyst guards for messing around, and she's happy to give a tour of the facilities to Sapphire, although she laments that Blue Diamond is not around to accept the gift in person. Blue Diamond is now the owner of the facility, taking the responsibility of maintenance from Pink Diamond after she was shattered. Amethyst is ordered to watch the door, and Pearl is ordered to open the gates and such ahead of them, with Holly laughing at how precocious Pearl is for walking alongside the others. As she proceeds to talk about how great Blue Diamond is, Ruby nearly loses her temper, as Blue Diamond was the one who initially disapproved of Garnet's fusion and costed them their own lives. Seeing this, Sapphire and Ruby pretend that there's an issue with the engine that requires they leave the others behind to check. Pearl attempts to open the door to the zoo, but fails due to not understanding the gem technology there. So Ruby and Steven attempt to smash down the door, failing and getting caught by Holly, who immediately assumes that it was one of the Amethysts responsible for the damage. She also informs them that Blue Diamond has returned early, and she is eager to have them meet. Steven gets tossed into processing without the others, where he's then cleaned and changed into different clothes, deposited into a pool inside of the zoo, where he sees his father. The zoo. Steven arrives inside of the human zoo, which is not a typical zoo with cages, but a utopia-like location full of humans who are eerily cheerful. Greg explains that they're all nice people who have been entertained by the stories Greg told of Steven during his short time there. They also each have earrings that emit a tiny voice telling them what to do at all times of the day, when to eat, when to play, and when to wash up. Steven is shocked by how eagerly the Zoomans enjoy their time inside the zoo, in spite of the fact that they can't leave or go back to Earth. But Greg points out they have no concept of what the outside of the zoo even is, or what Earth is like, as they're the descendants of the original captured humans from thousands of years ago. They enjoy their cage because they don't know what the outside world is like and have no reason to even suspect there is more to life than following the orders of the voice in their earrings. The gems of Homeworld are the same way, unable to imagine a better life than the one they have following orders from their superiors, because they've never lived a life free from those superiors or been given the opportunity to wonder if better things are possible. People tend to long for better things, but they only define better as experiences of their own, so the Zoomans lack the ambition because they have nothing to strive for, while crystal gems, for example, can fight for a time where Rose Quartz was still around, or Steven can fight to get his father back. That night, or at least when the zoo tells them it's night, Steven and Greg seek the door, but find that it won't budge at all. The other Zoomans explain that it's only opened in the past when somebody experiences hurt, and it doesn't open otherwise. The Zoomans follow this up by saying that they don't actually know what hurt means. In spite of a few attempts to punch Greg so that they can hurt enough to open the door, it still doesn't move. Then it's time for something called the Choosening. The Choosening involves all the Zoomans gathering in the middle of the zoo, where the voice in their earrings matches them into pairs. Greg wants no part of this, and when he is matched with someone else, he teaches the Zoomans that on Earth, people get to choose their Choosening partner. As Greg is the most exotic person there, all the Zoomans choose Greg as their partner. He then tells them that on Earth, your partner also gets a say, and he's already taken, rejecting all of them. This causes the Zoomans to break into tears at this rejection, meaning that they finally understand what hurt means. Because they're all crying, the door opens and a bunch of Amethyst guards burst in to calm them down, which Steven and Greg use as an opportunity to escape. But before they can make it out the door, they get grabbed by one of the guards. That will be all. Steven and Greg are taken to a room full of amethysts and jaspers, where the amethyst they know laughs and says it was a joke on her behalf to pretend they got in trouble. In reality, she is excited to see her sisters as they all originate from Earth, too, and are happy to meet one of their own. Holly Blue then enters, wrapping up the tour and getting furious when she sees all the guards relaxing as Blue Diamond is there and they should be on their best behavior. Steven and Greg sneak out behind a shape-shifted Amethyst and make a run for it, ending up inside of a room full of bubbled rose quartz gems. Before they can investigate, Blue Diamond enters and begins grieving to herself when Yellow Diamond comes in after her, upset she is still sad over the death of Pink Diamond, but also confused as to why the rose quartzes of Earth are all bubbled rather than shattered, saying the defective line should be wiped out instead of stored away. She attempts to sing a song about how pointless it is to feel bad for the past to convince Blue Diamond to move on, but this doesn't get to her, because she still wants to preserve Pink Diamond's legacy through her zoo and such. Then Holly Blue and the rest come in to visit the Diamonds and to announce the completion of the delivery. Blue Diamond's confused because she never asked for a delivery of more humans, but Sapphire, with some assurance from Ruby, tells her that she foresaw that Blue would want one before the cluster was completed, which it hasn't yet. Steven and Greg then run out of the room with the others to return to the ship. Along the way, Holly Blue talks about how honored she is to have met 2 Diamonds on the same day and that the zoo was not forgotten about. And just as Steven and Greg are nearly at the ship, she finally notices them and gets furious. Garnet refuses and is able to easily stop her with the rest of the Jaspers and Amethysts doing nothing to stop their new friends from escaping. Holly claims that she is going to report them to the Diamonds, but gets stopped when Pearl points out that admitting to allowing rebels inside the base would mean she would get punished first, and they zoom out into space. As they return to Earth, Steven apologizes because it was his fault Greg got captured in the first place due to his curiosity. But Greg is alright, and the two have a far fonder appreciation for one another afterwards. The new Crystal Gems. The Wandering Eye returns to the beach where they reunite with the characters left behind from the previous arc. Steven greets Connie and asks her how things have been going since they left, with Connie recounting everything that happened as they were gone. First, she tried to catch up to Steven before he left, though because he was in too much of a rush, she was left behind with nothing but the message to keep Beach City safe without them. To do this, Connie went to the temple where she encountered Lapis and Peridot, who were given the same task. Peridot, as she always tries to do, forces herself into a leadership position so they can reform the crystal gems in their absence, calling herself the Garnet of the group and assigning roles to the others, Lapis being the Amethyst, Connie being the Steven, and Pumpkin being Pearl. They begin monitoring Beach City only to find trouble. There's no one manning Greg's car wash, and Dewey needs his van cleaned. Using Peridot's ferrokinesis and Lapis's water powers, they're able to clean off the van in a showy manner, which attracts more customers who also want their cars washed. But they start arguing as they wash more cars, claiming that the new crystal gems are not washing the cars right because they aren't properly embodying the personalities of their crystal gem counterparts. As they argue, they wind up nearly hurting Yellowtail and destroying the car wash's sign. After this failure, they return to the temple where Connie tries to channel her inner Steven to give a motivating speech, where she tells them that she is not Steven, and they aren't the crystal gems. They were able to take over the car wash just fine at first, when everyone was using their powers in a natural way. It was only after they started pretending to be people they weren't that things went wrong. The episode cuts back to the present, where they return to the car wash to see how things with the sign were resolved, and the crystal temps reveal a brand new sign they made for Greg before posing dramatically. Storm in the room. Steven and Connie are in the temple together as they wait for the crystal gems to return from installing the sign, and for Miss Maheshwaran to pick up Connie from the temple. But Connie's mom is taking longer than usual and isn't answering her phone, making Connie more and more nervous, though she does eventually arrive and the two hug before leaving. Then, Steven is alone. He wanders around the house in silence for a while before trying to eat some dinner, but he keeps looking up at the portrait of his mother on the wall and eventually tries to avoid her gaze. When a storm forces him back inside to confront these feelings, he laments that he isn't sure who his mother really is, because he's only ever heard secondhand stories about her from other people based on what they remember. Since nostalgia alone cannot really replace a person's existence, Steven seeks more answers inside of Rose's room, where he conjures an image of his mother. In spite of having a good time doing parent-child activities together, Steven eventually remembers that this is not his mom, just the version of his mother that he's capable of imagining. When he tries to memorialize the moment on his phone, he only gets a blank background with himself over it, driving home the point that nothing in the room is real. but in spite of none of it being real, it still affects Steven. Just because something is happening in his mind doesn't mean it can't have a real effect. Steven confronts the version of Rose in his mind about this, how she was supposed to be this wonderful person, and yet she hid Bismuth's bubble from the others and shattered Pink Diamond. He's not sure who to trust about her anymore, since the real Gem is gone. But Rose reminds him that the Gem itself still exists, just inside of Steven. She wouldn't have left him mementos of herself if she really used reforming into him as an excuse to avoid responsibility. Steven leaves the room and returns to being alone in the temple when the rest of the crystal gems come home with a pizza, as Steven realizes that, while he might only have the memories of his mother, he has the present and the future with everyone else. Rocknaldo. Steven finds Ronaldo handing out flyers on the street about the evils of rock people, saying that they're dangerous and a threat to the people of Beach City. Steven tells him not to spread information that could make the crystal gems look bad, as Ronaldo cannot truthfully identify the difference between evil rock people and good crystal gems, which causes the Fry Man to realize he doesn't know what he's talking about yet again, and he gives up his blog. Ronaldo then announces that he is going to become a crystal gem, showing up at the temple and demanding to be part of the group. Steven humors him, listening to the guy describe his new gem name, Bloodstone, and what kind of powers he wants, like wielding the sword he bought at a convention. As he's new, they don't actually allow him to go on missions and the like, which starts to make Ronaldo upset that they're not accepting of him, in spite of the fact that the crystal gems are supposed to be about acceptance. It's interesting that Steven even bothers to think on this for a time, as all the arguments that Ronaldo is making are technically correct, and yet it's obvious that he shouldn't be brought along on missions due to his lack of preparedness. It's when Steven starts to look at the guy's actions that he finally makes the connection that Bloodstone is demanding acceptance he would not extend to others, like when he demands to be the center of attention, but refuses to share the spotlight if it's time to think of someone else. After Ronaldo faints from a lack of sleep, they drop him off at his family's business. A few weeks later, Steven finds Ronaldo, who's now accepted that he isn't a crystal gem because he's too much of a loner. Steven suggests that he stick to his pamphlets, which are now pro-crystal gem. Tiger Philanthropist. Steven and Amethyst are back at the pro wrestling ring as Tiger Millionaire and the Purple Puma. But after winning a match, the Purple Puma announces his retirement to the boos of the audience. Steven wonders why Amethyst is quitting at the peak of her career, and she says she's no longer interested in performing, and there are other ways to have fun. The next day, Steven sees Lars depressed and dejected over Tiger Millionaire retiring, as he doesn't think they both had to retire at the same time. So Steven returns to the ring, this time as Tiger Philanthropist, with a theme of giving away money. In spite of defeating a few knockoffs meant to fill the void left by the others, Lars still bemoans that it's not the same and that the reboot misses the purpose of the original franchise. Steven asks him to clarify what it is he actually wants, but Lars doesn't give him much of an answer, as not even he knows that for sure. Steven returns to the temple, asking Amethyst why she quit, and she says that she only wrestled to deal with her feelings of inadequacy relative to the other gyms. Now that she's over all of that, she doesn't feel like she has to prove anything. But Steven's still upset about the loss of the activity they did together. The next night, Tiger Philanthropist announces that he's giving away his biggest thing yet, the tag team belt he and Purple Puma won before. But during this match, Amethyst returns, mad that Steven's giving away the belt that they earned together, as if it didn't mean anything to them. They meet in the ring and agree that wrestling doesn't mean anything for them anymore, but they don't want to simply give up out of nowhere. So the two proceed to throw their final match, so the belt is properly earned by a new team and they don't just stop out of nowhere. This whole episode plays with a lot of extra narrative quotes regarding how shows and series and such run on or stop. Lars is upset about his favorite wrestler quitting, as if it was his favorite show going off the air, and the explanation by the creators as to why the show had to end doesn't satisfy him, nor do any of the new shows made by the same people or reboots with similar characters. But to some, it's not about the fact that the thing ended, it's about the fact that it ended suddenly, instead of stopping at a point where it made sense to stop. So the Purple Puma and Tiger Millionaire end their careers in a satisfying way, and then the audience is okay with it. All except for those who wished the series would go on and on forever, regardless of whether anyone's heart was in it. Room for Ruby. Steven and Garnet are wishing upon stars when one of these shooting stars falls in front of the temple, revealed to be Navy, one of the rubies up in space. But instead of attacking them on sight, she asks Steven if she can live on Earth rather than going back to Homeworld. So Steven takes her to the barn where she can live and learn from the other gems living there. Though during the initial tour, Lapis is suspicious of how happy and energetic this ruby is for everything, even slightly Earth-related. Steven and Peridot have accepted Navy though, which causes Lapis to suspect that something's wrong with her because it took her months if not years to get used to Earth and to accept the differences as positive changes rather than just being different. Lapis had good reason to be slow to accept Earth as her new home, as her memories of the place were mostly negative. She's been trapped on Earth longer than she's been free on Earth. The other gems who have accepted the place have mostly experienced freedom of the planet though. Even Navy mentions that all she's really done down there is play baseball, watch Amethyst shapeshift a bit, and the only bad things were done because she started a fight. She does, however, eventually admit to one thing. She misses her spaceship, as it was the only place where she felt like she truly belonged. So Steven shows her where the Wandering Eye ship is, and the four of them get inside to fly it. Steven's excited that the crystal gems now have an experienced pilot, until Ruby tricks them into being launched out of the ship. As they're about to fall, Steven asks why Navy betrayed them, and she says the whole thing was a ruse to not just get back to her ship and return to Homeworld, but that she specifically wanted to see how sad they would get when they were betrayed. They fall into the water as Lapis laughs, feeling vindicated for not having trusted her all along. It is sometimes suspicious when a character is introduced to a cast and then is immediately brought up to speed, not just narratively but morally as well. Typically, you will see a character get used to a new life over the course of several episodes before they truly feel like they belong with a group. But as this found family trope gets used more and more frequently in the same show, the writers will make the adjustment period shorter with each new member, so as not to retread new ground. This then creates situations where a new character joins the heroes and is almost instantly accepted, no matter how suspicious it would actually be for them to turn coat so fast. Thus, Lapis feels good when the realistic outcome of a character suddenly loving everyone turns out to be the truth. It validates her struggles and the time it took her to reach the conclusions that she did. Lion 4. Alternate Ending. Steven is re-watching the VHS his mother left for him again and again, trying to work out if there's some kind of hidden message in what she said. He mostly finds gibberish this way, until Lion barfs up a key that Steven assumes must be connected to the destiny he's seeking out from his mom's old things. He revisits a bunch of old places connected to his mother in search for something that the key unlocks, but only winds up with empty hands and disappointment. So he asks Lion to take him somewhere new, and they go to the desert where he was first found, wandering into the horizon. The two travel for a long time before coming across a door in the middle of two giant pink hills that look a bit like legs. My first thought was that this was meant to reflect like a birthing metaphor throughout the episode as Steven seeks out the reason why he was created, but then I remembered that each of the diamonds has a ship shaped like a limb, 2 arms thus far, so it would make sense for Pink Diamond's Earth to have a giant ship shaped like legs. Really big robots are cooler than maternal metaphors, although the two aren't mutually exclusive. See my Neon Genesis Evangelion retrospective for more. Steven enters this room and discovers it's full of garbage, just a bunch of trash that Rose couldn't find another place for. He's upset as he starts to suspect that this is the reason he was made. He's just more garbage left behind by his mom, until he finds a second VHS tape on the ground dedicated to somebody named Nora. Steven asks Lion to take him to this Nora, wondering if she's a sister of his or something, but Lion instead takes him to the hill outside of Beach City, where Greg is practicing his guitar. Steven asks Greg who Nora is, and Greg says that the tape will answer the question. They plug it in and find that this tape is nearly identical to the first one, just with Nora's name over Steven's. As it turns out, Nora was one of 2 names that Greg and Rose had narrowed it down to. They didn't know if Steven was going to be a boy or a girl at that point, so they made 2 tapes. The point being that Steven's existence was not something done because he had to fulfill a role in his life or that he was born for a reason. Rose made Steven because she wanted to, and now he gets to do anything he wants to with his life, whether he's Steven or Nora or Rose or whoever. In the end, Greg says that the only thing he has to be is Rose's child, and Steven accepts this as good enough. Dug out. Steven and Connie are eating fry bits on the pier when Mr. Maheshwaran approaches, telling his daughter that he's in town to investigate a series of break-ins at Funland. The kids ask if they can ride along for the stakeout, and he allows them to, with Connie and Steven putting on some confiscated disguises as Carmen Sandiego and Mario, or at least royalty-free versions of them. When the park is broken into, they begin searching for the culprit, finding the lock shattered and hearing strange noises and creaking sounds. Doug is able to take the lead on this pursuit, having them use all their senses to follow the mystery loiterer into one of the rides. But when the door shuts behind them and they're briefly trapped, they start to suspect that the culprit is more intelligent than the mere gem beasts they've been fighting up to this point. Doug is a bit confused by all the gem lingo they've been talking about, realizing that the two of them have been going on adventures far more exciting than his life of sitting in his car and telling teenagers to go home. They eventually manage to follow and catch the culprit, cornering Onion in an alleyway and realizing there was a mundane explanation all along. Doug Maheshwaran's journey in this episode mirrors that of Connie back in the first season, back when she was jealous of Steven's fantastic gem powers, while she was the one who led the boring, mundane life. This time, it's Connie who reassures her father of the same thing Steven told her, that she enjoys the boring little moments in life too much to want them gone. She spends time with her father because he is normal, not in spite of that fact. In the end, they tell Onion to go home after letting him off with a warning, but two silhouettes appear in the shadows above him before the episode ends. The Good Lars. Steven is trying a pumpkin cake that Lars made, though his praise for it rings hollow as Lars points out that Steven would eat anything. When Buck Dewey enters and invites Lars and the others to a potluck party, Lars hides the cake from him, though Steven and Sadie encourage him to bake something for the event to impress them. Lars decides to make an ube, which Steven and Sadie both enjoy, much to Lars's joy. But after Sadie leaves, Lars second-guesses whether to bring a cake as he's afraid that the others will think less of him if he shows up with something he considers a lame hobby. Steven tries to cheer him up by saying that they invited him, and if he keeps hiding parts of himself from others, they can never truly like him for who he is, just who he's pretending to be. The potluck starts, though Lars hasn't shown up yet. The cool kids talk about how neat he is, even referencing something he said at Big Donut that Lars considered to be misspeaking. But after a while of Lars not showing up, Steven checks the dumpster outside and finds his cake inside of there. Assuming this means that Lars changed his mind, Steven breaks the news to Sadie, who was in the middle of jamming out with the others. Sadie was concerned she didn't fit in with the cool kids and that she was invited by accident, but learns that, contrary to what she thought, they were cool because they're accepting, and she did have a good time after all. The party ends without Lars, and Steven and Sadie head their separate ways, as the silhouettes from last episode appear behind Sadie. Are you my dad? Steven is waiting for a package he ordered, though it's not showing up, unusual because Jamie's normally very punctual. To pass the time as he waits for it, he heads to Big Donut, only to find it closed, with Sour Cream putting up flyers about his missing brother, Onion. While Steven is investigating to see if Sadie and Lars aren't just watching movies in the back room, he meets Barb, Sadie's mother, who is in the middle of dropping off another packed lunch, only to learn that she's been looking for some of the missing people as well. Steven looks around Beach City, finding it almost completely empty save for a small blue gem, who asks Steven if he is my dad, before flying away. Steven returns to the temple with news of this gem, pointing out that gems don't have dads other than him, and wondering about her connection to the missing people. They split into groups to search for this gem, or any of the missing townies, with Steven and Connie heading into the woods, where they finally find her, asking Connie who she is. After confirmation, a large yellow gem emerges from the woods, with many of the missing people inside its body, charging at Connie, defusing, and refusing with her trapped inside as well. Steven tries to rescue her, but is paralyzed by the smaller blue gem, who says she is an aquamarine, and the larger gem a topaz, who knocks Steven out as the episode ends. I am my mom. Steven warns the crystal gems about Connie's kidnapping, tracking her to the pier based on a photo Connie was able to send them. They arrive together with Steven calling the phone to track her, only for the ringing to get the attention of this duo of gems, who step out saying they're grabbing humans as part of a list. Aquamarine reveals that this list was sent by Peridot, the list of humans Steven told her about when the two first made contact. Aquamarine has been asking about a "my dad," as that's how Steven referred to Greg the first time. The Crystal Gems prepare to fight, though they can't fight effectively due to Topaz having a bunch of humans in her body that they can't harm, giving the Homeworld Gems the edge. When Aquamarine recalls that they don't necessarily need the humans returned alive, Topaz threatens them and Steven surrenders by claiming he is "my dad," and thus the one they want. He gets fused into Topaz as they head into the alien ship parked nearby, Steven's plan to simply bubble everyone out, failing because the gem's body is too thick. He does eventually manage this, but only after Jamie's able to distract them with a lengthy monologue, bursting everyone out of the room and defusing both Topazes. As they fight, Steven apologizes that it was his fault that the Homeworld Gems visited in the first place to kidnap everyone, though Connie tries to reassure him that he couldn't have known this would happen, and that they need to keep fighting. During the scuffle, Sadie is grabbed, and Lars, instead of helping her, runs deeper into the ship. But the rest of them head for the door, where they see Alexandrite holding the ship in place. They jump for the water down below, only to get stopped by Aquamarine's powers to suspend things in the air. Seeing everybody at risk, Steven admits that he isn't "my dad," but rather Rose Quartz, a much more valuable prize than a bunch of humans. They let the others go to take Steven instead, with Steven saying that while Rose Quartz wouldn't have let herself get captured this way, he would if it meant that he could stop the fighting. The alien ship zooms away with Steven, and I guess Lars, still on board. Stuck together. Steven is aboard the ship on the way back to Homeworld, saying that he's okay with whatever they do to him, while reassuring the others he is still Rose Quartz, ready to answer for her crimes. But then Lars is found stowed away inside the ship, carried up by a Topaz and fused alongside Steven, who tells Aquamarine that she went back on the deal, though she doesn't care they have one too many humans. Aquamarine prepares herself to meet with the diamonds as the ship prepares for takeoff, with Steven apologizing to Lars for getting him captured, while Lars confesses that he was only on the ship still because he ran away after seeing Sadie get grabbed. He also says that he ran from the party prior to being abducted, and that he's always been a coward who can't deal with confrontation, which is why he is so abrasive in the first place. You can't have a bad interaction if you end the interaction quickly. As Topaz is working on fixing parts of the ship damaged by Alexandrite earlier, Steven urges Lars to use his pants as a lasso to grab a destabilizer from a rack to free them. But Lars refuses to do this at first before eventually relenting, then half-assing the attempt, missing completely. Lars says he's too worthless at everything to have even tried to save them, and then says that he is scared all the time. Steven admits that he's scared too, and also that he's grateful for Lars being with him so he isn't taken off to Homeworld alone. This conversation moves Topaz so much that she agrees to let them go, realizing she wouldn't want to separate from herself either. But Aquamarine catches her in the act of sending them to the escape pod, which she then destroys, lamenting that fusions always end up growing sentimental, and their feelings get in the way. Despite being threatened, Aquamarine convinces her to fall in line by saying that the Homeworld Gems would never accept any rebellion from Topaz, and she defuses as they arrive, splitting up Lars and Steven while they head into the planet. The Trial. Steven is in a cell awaiting the trial of Rose Quartz and briefly speaking with an assigned blue zircon about the defense they could possibly make. But Steven doesn't want to defend his actions, insisting that he is guilty against legal counsel and hoping that during the trial he can convince the others that he acted alone so they'll spare Earth. The trial begins with Eyeball brought in to affirm that Steven is Rose Quartz based on his actions from Bubbled, where he healed her gem. Steven attempts to make his case by saying that he is guilty and so on, but Blue Diamond refuses to end the trial until she hears how it happened. Steven struggles to properly answer this question as he never considered the details of Pink Diamond's shattering. He assumes there was a fight and he assumes that Rose used the breaking point made by Bismuth, but this version of events doesn't line up with any of what they know of the incident. Realizing that the official record of events does not line up with what they know or at least what they can prove, Blue Zircon asks for Blue Diamond's palanquin to attempt to recreate the events. He points out that Pink Diamond was shattered shortly after leaving the palanquin, yet not a single gem in her entourage ever witnessed this or managed to stop it or warn her or even cry out before it happened, and it's unlikely that a mere quartz soldier would ever be able to get close enough without some sort of intervention. Then, Zircon points out that the only ones who would have the authority to alter records and cover up the details of this shattering would have to be someone as high-ranking as the Diamonds themselves. This infuriates Yellow Diamond, who poofs the lawyer, then poofs her own lawyer in rage. When Blue Diamond tries to calm her down, Steven and Lars use the fight as cover to escape into the Palanquin, which Steven drives out of the courtroom and into the open space of Homeworld. As they fall into this alien, in more ways than one, world, Yellow Diamond points out they won't make it far. We are yet to see much of Homeworld so far. The only things we know about it are things taught secondhand regarding the culture and ideology there. This episode teaches us about the Diamonds more directly, that they have a facsimile of a properly run society, albeit not one that has an honest justice system or anything else. The society is so stratified based on the ranking of people that they accept things like trials not to determine a person's guilt, but to reiterate the Diamonds' decisions to punish them and to legitimize their existing power. In this way, the authority of the Diamonds is derived from the fact that they have this level of authority in the first place. Their power is used to maintain power instead of being used for their citizens. Off colors. Steven and Lars are on the ground floor of Homeworld, recovering from the crash of the Palanquin. They don't have time to recover as they need to run from small, wandering eyes that are pursuing, scanning the two for gems and then opening fire. As they run, Lars frets that he spent too long running from things, even the stuff he enjoys, and now he's running once again. Then, the two are saved by an arm coming out of the ground, gesturing them closer. This arm belongs to a conjoined twin pair of Rudalites, who guides them deeper underground to a kindergarten that's been exhausted and abandoned. Here they meet the Off-Colors, a group of gems hiding in secret from the rest of Homeworld due to their imperfections that mark them for shattering. The robots from the surface follow them underground, having followed Steven and Lars down there, and they begin to scan for gems to shatter. Lars cowers as always, but Steven tells him that it's okay to be afraid in a scary situation, putting his hand on Lars's chest like they did back in Lars and the Cool Kids. Inspired by this, Lars leaps forward to block one of the Off-Colors from being scanned. Due to not having a gem, he's practically invisible to the machines, so Lars begins attacking them with rocks and whatever else he can find as Steven works on deflecting their beams with the shield. They're able to destroy the robots, but the explosion from one launches Lars into a wall where he falls to the ground unmoving. Because it's a kid's show, they can't outright say that he dies, but they can have Steven check his heart and then start to cry. These tears, unlike those from an indirect kiss, wind up having healing properties that bring Lars back to life, though his skin is now glowing pink. We've seen how the Diamonds rule in order to strengthen their rule for themselves, but here we see how the rulers of Homeworld actually try to benefit the common people. This is to say, they don't. The way to judge a society is not by the extravagance of the best off, but the dignity of those at the bottom. The Diamonds live in luxury, with those below deferring to their whims, and those at the bottom are hunted for being imperfect in their eyes, rather than society trying to make a space for everybody. This is a thematic core of Rose's rebellion, that she did try to make a place that everyone belonged to, instead of making a place, then forcing others to fit in, or be shattered. Lars's Head. Lars is back to life, concerned a bit about his pink skin, but otherwise appearing to be fine. They don't get much time to ponder this as the robots from before are still patrolling the area, and the boulder they pushed in front of the entrance will only hold so long. Torn between staying put and eventually being discovered, or moving out and being discovered, the Off-Colors are unsure what to do. Lars is still recovering from being brought back to life, wondering if he's now a zombie and asking Steven if he has a heartbeat, which he does, but while checking this, Steven realizes that Lars's head has a portal in it. Steven asks for permission to go inside of Lars's head again, remembering before when he did this without asking and nearly ruining his life. And Lars agrees to this much more literal entry. Steven then appears inside of the field that makes up Lion's Mane, walking over to Rose's island and appearing back inside the temple. Immediately, Steven grabs some food and water as he hasn't eaten or drank in days, then stocks up on supplies to bring back through the main to Lars. But before he goes through, Steven makes the connection that if Lars is pink and also a portal because he was brought back to life by Rose's tears, then Lion must have gone through the same thing. He considers leaving a note for the others, but goes back first. Once back on Homeworld, Steven gives food to Lars, though Lars reveals he isn't especially hungry despite not having eaten for as long as Steven. The rest of the off-colors are shocked about Steven returning with anything, as they were led to believe that the diamonds destroyed all life on Earth thousands of years ago. But Steven assures them that it's fine on Earth, and people are free to be who they want to be. This convinces the gems to enter Lars' head so they can go to Earth too, but when Steven struggles to get Lars to enter his own field due to being attached to it, Lars decides that he's going to stay on Homeworld. He's tired of being saved by other people and needing to be saved, so he's staying in order to be worth the life Steven gave him. The off-colors decide they'll stay with him so he won't be alone, but they do encourage Steven to leave, as he's the one that the gems are after. Lars hugs Steven goodbye and Steven leaves, reappearing in the temple just as the other gems return from searching for him, glad that he's alive. Dewey Wins. Steven is back from Homeworld, but the rest of the gems are still very concerned about the fact that he was missing for so long. He tries to escort Connie home, but she's upset with him for turning himself in rather than fighting against Aquamarine or resisting longer. Steven attempts to convince her that surrendering was the right thing to do, but she doesn't hear him out, returning home on Lion instead. The next morning, Steven tells Sadie about what happened to Lars, and she's horrified, which is bad as she was the practice run for telling Lars' parents. On his way to the Barriga house, he sees a mob led by Nanafua Pizza, blaming Dewey for the alien abductions among other things in Beach City, and Steven sends Sadie on ahead while he addresses the issue. He does this by trying to get Mayor Dewey's campaign for re-election back on track, explaining to Beach City that Dewey has nothing to do with the aliens, and he mostly just keeps a low profile. But the people of Beach City say that this is not a good way for a mayor to operate, that it should be his business if the place is under invasion. Steven spends the night prepping for a debate to rehabilitate Mayor Dewey's image after this disastrous press conference, trying to focus on the highlights of what Dewey has done and keeping people calm, and reassuring them things will go back to normal whenever there's a Crystal Gem related event. But Nanafua's speech concedes that she has been blaming Dewey for too much, and that it's the responsibility of the whole town to band together, rather than blaming the mayor then waiting for something to happen. Mayor Dewey, well now just Dewey, concedes that the city needs a mayor who does more than scapegoat for problems and drops out of the race, with his campaign manager Steven furious because the guy just gave up. Then Steven realizes that he also just gave up instead of fighting, even if the battle was a losing one. Because trying to fight even when you know you probably can't win is something that you should do for those around you. It's so that they can know that they did everything they could to support you rather than simply watching you throw that support away. Gemcation. Steven is on his phone constantly texting Connie to message him back as he wants to apologize for going off into space before, though after several days, he's yet to get any messages from her. Seeing how stressed Steven is, Greg and the Crystal Gems decide to take him on a vacation to a rental house in the woods so he can unwind, but Steven spends the whole ride there on his phone, still waiting for a reply. Each of the gems in time tries to talk to Steven to ease his stress, with Amethyst trying and failing to start a conversation, Garnet hoping to describe Pink Diamond's reign only to get hushed, and even Pearl attempting to tell Steven the truth, though she doesn't get the chance to do so. Greg has been asking them all to help Steven out, as he assumes that his son is traumatized from his trip to Homeworld, and the gems must be more qualified to talk to him about gem stuff that he doesn't understand. This has always been the tragedy of Greg's character, that he's always depicted as a loving man who cares deeply for Steven, and yet there's only so much that he can do to help out his son, due to the fact that Steven is not only anatomically different from him, but is going to grow up differently, and Greg will never truly be able to understand what the kid needs, no matter how hard he tries. But the tragedy of Steven's character is also brought up here when he tells the gems that he's not struggling to deal with what happened on Homeworld. He's struggling to maintain his relationship with Connie, as he blames himself for the rift between them after promising to do everything together, then leaving without her twice. This is a tragedy as Steven is going through struggles of trying to save the world, and yet he still blames himself for the personal struggles of the people close to him. Last episode, he even tried to make Mayor Dewey's re-election bid his business, despite acknowledging that Dewey and Steven had very little overlap in their responsibilities. Here, he blames himself for the damage to a relationship, despite relationships being something that people have to maintain together. One person cannot do all the work. After admitting this, Greg realizes that this is something he can actually help with, so he talks to Steven about their coping mechanisms. Greg admits that the entire trip is a way to get closer to his son to help both of them with the Homeworld stuff from last season, but then notices that Steven's phone doesn't have a signal out there and he was wasting his time all along. So Steven begs his father to drive him higher up in case Connie has been trying to message him. They make it to a cliff where Steven finally gets a signal, but he still hasn't heard back from her. Giving up on waiting, Steven sits on the roof with his father, joined by the rest of the crystal gems. Raising the barn. Steven is still waiting for a response from Connie, only to get a call from Peridot instead. She and Lapis are asking about his trip to Homeworld, wondering if he's okay. Steven mentions the details of his trip, but when he mentions the trial, Lapis freaks out and says they need to leave Earth immediately. Steven rushes to the barn where he sees Lapis preparing to lift the entire building out of the ground. He tries convincing her to stay, but Lapis is convinced that the diamonds are going to come to Earth to seek retribution, so they have to hide. But before she can leave, they realize that Pumpkin is missing, so the trip is postponed as they search for their pet. Steven and Peridot are looking together, walking through the woods as Peridot tries to assure Steven, as well as herself, that things will be fine and they can stay in touch. How exactly she's unsure, as they won't have Wi-Fi in space. She rationalizes leaving alongside Lapis by saying that she's done a lot to make sure that Lapis is comfortable on Earth after everything that's happened. The two return to the barn with no Pumpkin, only to find their pet inside the crops, hiding from the others. Peridot attempts to yank Pumpkin over, but as she tells the plant to leave, she accidentally lets slip that she herself doesn't want to leave Earth, but has to for Lapis's sake. Steven convinces Peridot to tell Lapis how she really feels before she tries to leave again, saying that she's not coming with her on her trip as the two of them ought to stay on Earth because the diamonds might return, and if/when they do, they should fight for their planet. Lapis has had a story arc before about being uncomfortable on Earth, convinced to stay because home's wherever you put effort into making a home. But Lapis doesn't see it that way, or rather, she agrees that they should protect what matters to them, yet what matters to Lapis is the barn and the Meepomorphs and her friends, which is why she wants to take them away, for safety. In spite of Peridot opening her heart about her issues, Lapis leaves, taking the barn with her, so Steven sets up the bathroom for Peridot to live in yet again. He checks his phone, still not having received a message from Connie. When Peridot asks him what they're going to do, he doesn't have a response. Back to kindergarten. Steven still doesn't have the use of his bathroom back after several days of Peridot pouting in there, listening to depressing music and not moving. Having enough of this, Amethyst insists on taking her on a trip to the kindergarten to cheer up, as that's what used to make Amethyst feel better. Once there, she begins to look at all the old gem holes, now recognizing the shapes of a few of them and matching them to the other quartzes she met at the zoo. Peridot, like before, starts correcting her, and for a moment begins to act like her old self. Then they notice a flower growing out of the ground, which indicates that something is capable of growing in that spot after all. And as Peridot has farming experience, they ask her if she would be willing to plant things in the kindergarten to turn it into a regular garden. Over a montage, the three work together as Peridot orders them around, eventually bringing some green back to the valley. The next day, Peridot is eager to check on it again, no longer living in the bathroom. But when they arrive, they see the place once again devoid of life, as the flowers died with no sunlight. Peridot begins to pout that nothing good will ever happen in that place, even returning to the flower from before to smash it for getting her hopes up, when it's revealed to be the bait part of an anglerfish-like corruption. Steven and Amethyst form smoky courts to fight this beast and are able to pretty quickly dispatch it, though Amethyst still isn't happy as she wanted a place to be lively again. They ride the train back home, where Steven points out that there's still plenty of vibrancy in the rest of Earth, and that they shouldn't have tried to pick the least habitable spot in the first place. At this, Peridot cheers up a bit, knowing that it might be best to move on. Of course, this is not an episode about planting flowers in the kindergarten, it's about trying to create something better and to make a home out of your circumstances. Peridot and Lapis's farm at the barn was a representation of the two of them taking control of their new lives on Earth. They didn't simply live there as refugees, they made the place better for living there, and embraced the change as a result. But then all of the work that Peridot put into making the barn into a home went away in an instant as Lapis flew off with it, so of course she would begin to think that anything the gyms touch would be permanently unlivable, just like the kindergarten is devoid of all life. Her attempts to fix the place were an attempt to fix herself, and for that to be destroyed too means that she might be incapable of fixing anything. But that's not the case, because sure, the kindergarten might be an unlivable void now, but it's a small part of a much bigger planet. Some things can't be fixed, but some things don't need to be. Sadie Killer. Steven comes into Big Donut with a large order for the cool kids who are having a band practice, where he sees an exhausted Sadie talking to herself as she's been working Lars's shift since he disappeared to space. Steven invites her to watch them practice, though she isn't sure if she can commit to coming by after work. At the practice, Buck reveals that they've got a gig coming up despite not having a name or a song. As they try to come up with the song for their band, they all disagree on the direction, eventually giving up just as Sadie arrives. The next day, they see her coming home from work and decide to bring the practice to her, entering Sadie's house with their instruments and such, and setting up in her bedroom. Here, they discover her horror movie collection and insist on watching one together. The soundtrack of the zombie movie inspires them to start playing along, and soon, Sadie is improvising lyrics for their new song, The Working Dead. These lyrics are fitting, as zombies were originally created as an idea of a person who worked themselves to death so much that their corpse continued slaving away after their spirit was gone. Happy to have found a beach horror vibe, the band is ready for the gig, but Sadie says she won't be able to make their concert due to having work. The next day, Steven asks her for help with more lyrics, trying to coax her overwhelmed feelings out of her this time with this line of questioning, and having Sadie confess that she never liked her job but doesn't want to stop working because she isn't sure what else she could do. The uncertainty is more terrifying than wasting her life selling donuts. Steven takes some of these depressing lyrics back to the others as they prepare for the show, but as they stop along the way to look for the directions, Sadie catches up, saying she can make not only the show but their practices as well because she quit. Kevin Party. Steven is putting up flyers for his missing lion as he was last seen giving Connie a ride home weeks ago. He encounters Kevin, who's throwing a party Steven's invited to because he wants Stevonnie to make an appearance. Steven turns him down until hearing Connie will be there, then he decides to go in an attempt to see her once again. Steven arrives and quickly sees her, but Kevin tells him he can't simply walk over as he'll come across as desperate. It's better to pretend he's not interested first, so Connie sees how much better his life is without her. Steven goes along with this advice for a time, with Kevin getting increasingly frustrated with the boy as Steven keeps wanting to go over and talk about his feelings, something Kevin says cool kids at cool parties shouldn't do. The two proceed to have fun in every way except talking to Connie. Only once she is alone does Kevin tell Steven to go over, but when he starts talking the way he was instructed to, he ends up offending Connie by acting like everything is fine. But Connie doesn't accept this, revealing that she wanted to talk to Steven in person instead of reuniting over text, but then missing him just barely a few times over the last few episodes. Desperate enough to see Steven, she even accepted an invite to a Kevin party. Steven and Connie finally make up, and Kevin's excited to see Stevonnie as he only wanted them back together so he could hang around someone cool. But then Steven and Connie remain unfused, just happy to be together again, as they portal home on Lion's back. Steven, at Kevin's advice, spends this episode pretending that everything is fine even when it isn't. This only drives a further wedge between the two of them, as their argument was over how nonchalant Steven was acting, despite turning himself in and disappearing into space. By his own admission, he didn't want any of his friends to be taken, and yet allowed them to experience the same loss. Then, once he got back, he acted like everything was fine. In part, this was because Steven was attempting to put on a brave face to calm everyone down, but sometimes, acting stoic and detached hurts others who are not acting that way. They feel panicked over the situation, and to see you unbothered makes their feelings seem invalid. This is combined with the metaphor of Steven spending the party playing hard to get around Connie, like he doesn't even want to talk to her after so long apart. The truth is that playing hard to get only makes you hard to want, and a person who respects your feelings will only let you go if you act like that's what you want. In the end, it's opening up emotionally that gets Steven and Connie back together because being jam buddies and talking to one another is how they got together in the first place. Lars of the Stars. Steven and Connie have obtained a gift from Lars's parents to bring to him as they check up on the guy, taking Lion's mane into space and wondering if he's okay. They quickly find out he is, as they appear not in a cave underground like they were expecting, but inside of a spaceship, the Sun Incinerator, in the midst of a battle between Lars and the Off-Colors versus Emerald. As it turns out, Lars has been doing great since he was left on Homeworld, taking advantage of the fact that he's invisible to gem scanners to evade capture and steal his way through several sectors of space. Steven and Connie drop off the care package from Beach City, where Lars begins to feel sentimental about all the gifts given to him, until he sees a few pictures of Sadie Killers and her new band. Lars grows upset about seeing Sadie move on with her life, mad that she didn't wait around for him to return, and that she seems to be better off with the change. This anger causes Lars to freeze up just as Emerald's ship catches up to his. The Off-Colors await an order, but Lars doesn't give one, until Steven and Connie fuse into Stevani and begin explaining to him that he ought to be happy that Sadie is moving on, as before quitting her old job, she was miserable and depressed. The previous episode had Kevin posit that pretending to have moved on from a person will make them want you more, and this episode shows what happens when that sort of thing is actually believed. The person you moved on from feels less valuable, like you never cared in the first place. But people do move on from lost relationships no matter what, and we often only see the end destination instead of the entire journey. Lars never saw how hard it was for Sadie to recover, just that she has. Lars gets out of his funk and orders the ship to stop, comparing Stevani to Lars and Sadie, to Emerald and a Sun Incinerator, then calling her bluff she won't actually destroy her own ship. The engines are grazed though, and Lars says he'll have to take his personal ship to destroy Emerald's weapons before they recharge. But Stevani offers to take flight instead so Lars can stay in command, flying out and taking out their target, though getting shot down in the process. The episode ends on the two falling towards a nearby planet. Jungle Moon. Stevani crash lands the damaged ship on a jungle planet, surviving by bracing the blow with the shield. As the ship's console is too damaged to contact the main ship, Stevani has to survive on this planet for as long as they can, something they learn's only possible after being attacked by life down there. After a few nights, they come across an abandoned spire that they head towards, getting chased inside by a bird-like alien and then using it for shelter for the night. Stevani falls asleep and wakes up Tiny, inside of Connie's house. They see a giant Miss Maheshwaran on her phone, ordering fleets of ships around while paying no attention to them until they climb up and grab the phone. When she finally looks at the two, they see that her pupils are those of Yellow Diamond, and so the dream shifts to the Spire's past, where they're in the midst of an invasion. Stevani keeps pestering Yellow Diamond for a fleet of her own, then a ship, then a colony, before Yellow dismisses her. As she walks off in anger, they see their own reflection is that of Pink Diamond. Stevani awakens back inside the Spire, going to the top and activating the computer using the passcode from their dream. This alerts Lars' ship, and he reroutes course to pick up his friend, even blasting away the creature from before and making up for saving his life before. I'll put off talking about this one until later for reasons people who have seen the show and know what's going on will understand. Your Mother and Mine. Lars' ship has damaged thrusters and they're stranded as they wait for repairs. So to pass the time, Steven decides to introduce the Off-Colors to Garnet as she is the leader of the Crystal Gems. She passes through Lars' head and appears in the ship full of mismatched gems, immediately complimenting everyone on how unique they are. But the Off-Colors aren't flattered by these observations, assuming that Garnet is only pointing out their inconsistencies in order to make fun of them. As they explain, these are the things that have caused their lives to be so hard on Homeworld. It's hard to take pride in something when it's caused you so much harm. Garnet tries to explain that, on Earth, differences are celebrated, just like Rose Quartz taught them. And this only scares the Off-Colors further as they've been taught not only to hate themselves, but to fear Rose Quartz or anyone else who would try to convince them to accept them for who they are. Garnet decides to explain the history of Rose's rebellion as she realizes that the version they've been taught is the propagandized version that the Diamonds have manipulated. Earth was once selected as a colony to be owned by Pink Diamond, with every gem made on the colony grown to serve her directly. But Rose Quartz, despite being a regular quartz soldier, began to notice the organic life on Earth and fell in love with the environment there. She pointed out the animals living there to Pink Diamond, saying that they ought to stop mining the planet to allow that life to thrive, But when the Diamonds rejected this offer, Rose decided to begin a rebellion by recruiting all the servile and misshapen gems to her side. Pink Diamond called upon Blue and Yellow for aid in this rebellion, and the war dragged on, eventually forcing Rose to shatter Pink Diamond to end the war more quickly. But the story doesn't end there. As retaliation for shattering Pink Diamond, the other 3 diamonds used a powerful attack to corrupt every gem on Earth to make it uninhabitable, with only a few surviving thanks to Rose-Quartz's shield. The off-colors are now depressed as the story didn't actually have a happy ending. The villain whose defeat they used to celebrate was actually good, but is now dead. But Garnet points out the real point of the story. The biggest lie they were told by the Diamonds was not that Rose was defective, but that the battle was over, and there was no one left to fight against. Since Garnet is living proof otherwise, this means there is still something to fight for. Reinvigorated, the off-colors and Lars begin to repair the damage to the ship, managing to get power back online, though they still have to repair the thrusters. So to do this, they go to a nearby asteroid mine, knowing the dangers but accepting the risk. At the end of the episode, Steven also talks to Garnet in private about the dream he had of Pink Diamond back when he was on the Jungle Moon. His fear is that somehow Pink Diamond is still alive in some way, though Garnet assures him that she's not, unaware how accurate her statement really is. The Big Show. Steven is recording the early days of the band Sadie Killer and the Suspects using his dad's old camcorder, talking to them as they wrap up a rehearsal just in time for Barb to get home and talk excitedly about her daughter being in a band. But Sadie says they had an agreement that her mother would not involve herself in her daughter's hobbies anymore due to how obsessive she can be, so Barb leaves. Steven then shows the recording to Greg, who likes the sound so much that he's reminded of his early days as a traveling musician. After seeing them play live, he gets the idea in his head to fund a tour for them, calling up an old music industry contact and scoring them a gig in Empire City. Barb sees them packing for this trip and offers to come with them, but Sadie once again tells her off for forcing her way into her life. As they're setting up for the concert, Sadie sees a woman in a gaudy makeup and an oversized outfit, assuming it's her mother come to watch in disguise, and then growing angry because her mom ignored their agreement. During the performance of their new song, Ghost, Sadie repeatedly confronts this woman with the lyrics about disappearance. Backstage, this woman visits, revealed not as Sadie's mom, but Greg's contact in the industry. Sadie realizes that she's actually disappointed her mother didn't come to see the show, as she realizes once again that this sort of affection is just how her mom shows her love. Pool hopping. Steven is looking down at Beach City, observing how different it is with a new mayor, with Sadie leaving, and Lars up in space. He wishes he could get a donut like before when he realizes that Big Donut is somehow still open, and Garnet's working there. She says she got a job at Big Donut as it was the least likely thing for her to do. Her future vision only works on likely outcomes rather than small niche events. By behaving randomly, she's able to look into less likely futures. Steven thinks that this sounds cool and decides to go with her, with the two of them going out to behave erratically, though probably. Ordering 20 pizzas, then giving them away, with the final one going to Vidalia's house as her son Onion is still missing. Except Onion's home. Garnet simply didn't realize that he was back, as she was looking at a different timeline. When they arrive, they see Vidalia painting more pictures, offering to be her muse for a time before seeing a one-eyed kitten picking through the garbage. They follow this cat into a clearing where they find several more, and Garnet finally breaks down because they're in such uncharted territory she cannot predict what's going to happen next. She says that it's been like this for a while, that Steven's actions are so unlikely that she is unsure about anything going on with the Homeworld gyms and such. Steven tells her that life isn't about trying to guess the future, but rather picking a future you want and trying to make that real, and he shelters the kittens despite that being a likely outcome of finding them. Steven and Garnet find a foster program for these cats, with Garnet adopting the one-eyed one herself, naming him Cat Steven, as Vidalia unveils her finished piece of the two of them together. The entire reason Garnet exists is because Sapphire was infatuated by Ruby's unpredictable behavior, the love she felt causing her to act in erratic ways that nobody on Homeworld had seen before to create something new and better. Garnet feels the same way about Steven, that he is a new kind of gym whose behavior is unlike any gym before him, and that following him around is creating a constant stream of new experiences. This was partially the reason why Rose Quartz wanted so badly to make Steven in the first place, not just to make something new, but out of love. There is a constant connection between the love Rose Quartz had for Earth and the rebellion against the rigid society of the Gems that she fought to get rid of. There's a connection between the love of Ruby and Sapphire making something unknown and new. There's a connection between the love of the kitten Steven and Garnet found and their desire to have done something unusual to find them. And yet for all of the illogical behavior that had to be done in order to create all these sources of love, despite how unlikely they were, there's still one very logical and predictable thing that kept all of them going: the love itself. Because while love might be unpredictable, the reaction to it is simple. You want to do things to help each other. You don't have to have future vision to predict that. Letters to Lars. While floating through space, Lars has a letter pop out of his head from Steven. He begins to read about how the people of Beach City have been getting along since he left. Mayor Nanafwa has rallied the people together in an emergency preparedness plan in case the Homeworld gyms return, having the local restaurant owners stockpiling emergency rations, Greg and Rocknaldo looking out through a newly purchased telescope, and the Pizza Family plus Pearl sending out emergency alerts if needed. Everybody has a role in this plan except Dewey, who complains loudly of this. Sadie and her band are working on their music when Dewey crashes a rehearsal looking for some way to contribute. He also crashes an improv show hosted by Jamie during an argument over Amethyst shapeshifting into the objects they're pretending to use that Peridot doesn't see the issue with. Dewey also attempts to play tennis with Garnet and Greg, though Garnet's slow shots are too much for either of them to handle. The pro wrestling ring is back in action, and Steven gives Lars a few updates on that, before closing with the fact that PD now has his own tater tot food truck, the Dewey-mobile, that's been painted over. Steven sees a dejected Dewey walking along the street after all his attempts to fit in have failed, flagging him down and asking about what's wrong. Dewey says that the town has changed to the point of no longer needing a guy like him around, and that he doesn't have a place in Beach City. But Steven points out that Big Donut needs employees, and in the end, Dewey has a new job selling donuts, even renaming most of the products after himself, except for one which he calls the Pink Lars. Can't go back. Steven is woken up in the middle of the night by Rocknaldo, who's shocked because he has discovered a moon base with Greg's telescope. Steven tries to tell him it's just the spire they've been to before, until Rocknaldo mentions that the moon base is barn-shaped. Realizing that the moon is where Lapis took the barn, he takes Lion up there to see for himself. Steven doesn't find Lapis inside the barn, but does see her in the spire, sitting in a room that's projecting various scenes from Earth inside of it. Lapis is looking at Beach City and the surrounding area, telling Steven that she wasn't able to make it very far from Earth because she missed her home too much. She was distracted by looking back that she couldn't go forward. She sings the song, That Distant Shore, about how she finally felt comfortable surrounded by her friends, and that was what truly made her feel as though she belonged somewhere. Except her fear over the return of the diamonds caused her to destroy that friendship, the real reason she thinks she can never go home. Lapis's story is one about trauma. She's been trying to adapt to her new life, but the old one always catches up to her. This isn't so much the people she surrounds herself with, as they've proven that they can change, but the memories she has of being trapped and victimized for most of her existence. It's not Lapis Lazuli's past that's hurting her, it's herself, and because she feels as though it's her own mind that's broken, she keeps ruining the things that could be good about her future by bringing these thoughts into them. So Lapis's own worst enemy is herself, and all her attempts to heal are prevented by the fact that she doesn't think she's capable of healing. Lapis is only free from the mirror and the oppression of the diamonds physically. In her head, she's still stuck. Steven does convince Lapis to return to Earth, even if it will be awkward, as her friends will still be there for her when she does. Since Steven was woken up in the middle of the night, he falls asleep inside the spire, and then dreams of a few scenes of Pink Diamond being scolded by the others for not dealing with the rebellion properly. This vision ends with the silhouette of Pearl, the Pearl he knows, wielding Rose's sword and approaching before Steven wakes up. When he mentions the diamond dream to Lapis, she panics again and flies away in spite of Steven pleading with her things will be okay. Steven gets up and decides it's time to confront Pearl about this vision. A single pale rose. Steven confronts Pearl about whether she was the one to have shattered Pink Diamond, and Pearl freezes up, using her phone's lack of a case as an excuse to avoid talking about it. Steven then gets a text from her about wanting to tell him the truth, but Pearl says she can't recall sending this because her phone has gone missing inside of her gym. So she has Steven go inside her gym in order to get the cell phone, meeting an inner Pearl in charge of organizing the objects that surface Pearl conjures from her head. This inner Pearl cannot find the cell phone either, but she has the same idea as before, to send Steven inside of her own gym so he can retrieve the cell phone from the others. He enters an earlier memory of the temple where he sees Pearl crying over Rose's decision to have a baby, realizing he has to go back further and asking this Pearl to help look for the phone. Deeper down, he sees a Pearl lamenting the destruction following the end of the gym war that they thought they had won because the Homeworld gyms were evacuating. Then he jumps back to the moment where Rose shattered Pink Diamond, but when Steven screams in fear from seeing this, Rose turns to face him, revealing she is a shapeshifted Pearl, whose gym he enters once more. Steven finally comes into an overheard conversation between Rose Quartz and her Pearl inside the palanquin. Pearl is hesitant to follow a particular order, but Rose insists that she go through with it because she's incapable of shattering herself. Rose Quartz shapeshifts into her true form as Pink Diamond, and Pearl takes on the form of Rose, acting out the scene they planned with fake shards planted at the site of Pink Diamond's supposed shattering, actually the diamond faking her own death to end the rebellion. Rose Quartz was an assumed identity all along. Steven texts Pearl to say that he found her phone, exiting her gym as Pearl reveals that her final order from Pink Diamond was to never speak of that moment again. But she didn't speak of the moment, she simply asked Steven to retrieve a phone from her memories. He laments that his mother was Pink Diamond all along, which Amethyst is shocked to overhear. For those who watched the original part 1 of this video before I abridged it, you've likely already heard me misspeak this episode's twist before. I accidentally called Rose Quartz Pink Diamond once or twice. This is one of those huge spoilers, like Garnet being a fusion, that is well known enough that people who haven't seen Steven Universe already know about it. So for the last several seasons, I've been speaking about Rose and Pink as though they were two different people, and describing episode plots as though that wasn't something I already knew. But I don't think that this detracts from the reveal at all. A good plot twist is something that makes the show more rewatchable. Having a short surprise for the audience might get people talking, but they won't talk for long unless this twist recontextualizes a lot about what preceded it. Rose Quartz being Pink Diamond is one of those things that gives context to earlier flashbacks and instances where Homeworld gyms bring up the past. It also adds a thematic irony to the fact that Rose defeated Pink, in the sense that yes, Rose Quartz took the place of Pink Diamond and Pink Diamond no longer exists because of her. It was less of a shattering and more of a transformation, but the same language can nonetheless apply. Now, we're only falling apart. Amethyst is trying to deal with the new knowledge that Rose Quartz was actually a disguised Pink Diamond, but Garnet is handling the information much worse, even defusing, as Sapphire gets angry over the fact that her entire life as a fusion was based on a lie from a diamond. This is made worse by the fact that Sapphire never used her powers to look into Rose herself out of respect that she feels was betrayed. Sapphire runs to Rose's fountain, with Steven and Pearl following her to the now snowy area. Pearl was under orders never to reveal the secret, but because it's now known about, she can explain the entire story, which she does, hoping it'll cheer up Sapphire. Pink Diamond had begged and pleaded to get her own colony and was assigned Earth. Excited at first, but quickly growing bored when she realized that watching the planet slowly be unmade from space was not interesting. She asks Pearl to project an image, literally imaginate, of Pink Diamond down on Earth with the newly minted Quartz soldiers. As Pink Diamond thinks that this looks like fun, she changes form and goes down, blending in for a bit before being held back by Pearl so they don't get found out. Pink then goes to the rest of the planet to personally observe what's going to become her new soldiers, only to see fields of plants and even early human life, where she realizes that she isn't creating new life, but destroying the old one. Sapphire's upset about learning this, that the entire rebellion and their whole lives as crystal gems was based on a diamond being bored and messing around, and she drew them into a fight rather than just stopping the destruction herself. But Pearl mentions that Pink Diamond tried to stop the Earth from being destroyed only to be told off by the others. They gave her the human zoo to try to appease her obsession with humans, but Pink Diamond decided to take matters into her own hands by leading an open rebellion against the others. This was originally just meant to scare the diamonds away from Earth until the day where she met Garnet, and was quickly obsessed with the newly discovered idea that fusions between different types of gems was possible. Pearl and Rose briefly try to fuse, but don't hold the form for long before discovering Garnet and taking her in. Sapphire cheers up, learning that Rose's rebellion was actually shaped by her fusion instead of the other way around. I've mentioned before that a good society is one that tries to make itself a welcoming place for everybody, and this is proof of Rose Quartz's commitment to the idea. She had no idea that fusions like Garnet could exist, but rather than trying to get her to unfuse and join in a more familiar form, she changed the way she thought to allow for more fusions in the future. Society should serve the people in it, not the other way around. They return to the temple in a better mood, only to find it empty, with a letter from Ruby. What's your problem? Pearl, Sapphire, and Steven return to a note from Ruby saying that she's run away, and Sapphire breaks into tears at not having her other half, with Pearl comforting her. Amethyst tries to convince Steven not to bother searching and to play video games with her instead, but Steven leaves anyway, and Amethyst follows. As they're walking the beach, Amethyst keeps doing bits and shapeshifting into various gag sizes, with Steven upset that she's not taking this search more seriously. Eventually, they stop for pizza at Fish Stew, where she attempts to get Steven to open up about the discovery that his mom was a diamond, and that technically he is too. But Steven says he hasn't really thought about that yet, as he's too busy helping other people, and this is the problem that Amethyst says she has found. Steven should be processing his own feelings instead of constantly trying to micromanage everyone else's emotions. He's just learned a ton of new information, but won't even let himself think about it, bottling up the feelings through selfless acts, but hurting himself in the end. Amethyst, too, says that none of the rose quartz pink diamond stuff is her problem because she wasn't even born until after it happened, and yet she still ends up dealing with the fallout of the event in spite of it not being her fault. She compares herself to Steven, who's trying to make it his business, and compares his refusal to allow others to process their emotions to the fact that he's denying his own. They overhear the pizza twins discussing Greg and a big tip he left after ordering for Ruby, and they head out to help her. But Steven keeps trying to stop Amethyst from flying because he wants to know how she feels about the entire situation. Amethyst, upset that Steven hasn't really realized the lesson that she's trying to teach, attempts to shake him off so Steven will be alone with his thoughts, but he hangs on and eventually causes a crash near the water tower. They land on the beach where Amethyst finally says the truth about how she feels. It doesn't matter. Sure, she has complex thoughts about it and needs some time and space to vent, but taking out thousands of years of traumatic experiences and expecting a child to do the emotional labor for her would be irresponsible. Sometimes people need to be responsible for their own emotional baggage instead of forcing it onto others. Steven admits that Amethyst has become the most mature of the crystal gems, and the two head to the cliff because they both want to meet up with Greg and Ruby. The question. Steven and Amethyst find Ruby with Greg, the two of them having talked it all out. According to Ruby, she's totally fine without Sapphire now, even finding new hobbies she can enjoy without wondering if Sapphire would like it too. One of these hobbies is reading comics, specifically one about a lonesome cowboy, and she decides that her journey of self-discovery should involve the open plains. So they head into a field in the middle of nowhere, where Ruby gets to act out this Ruby Rider fantasy, being dependent on no one but herself and getting into trouble. She enjoys not knowing what's about to happen without Sapphire's predictions. After a montage and a song, Steven is impressed at how well she is taken to being alone, until Ruby admits that the entire time she was singing, she was thinking about Sapphire and how she would feel in the open plains with her. No matter how much independence she has, she still wants to go back to the way things were, but she's also aware that, after what they've learned, it would be dishonest to do so, and it was Rose's dishonesty that made them break apart in the first place. Ruby's arc in this episode is all about finding independence in solitude, or at least as much solitude as she can get when her horse is Amethyst. She's no longer a part of Garnet after learning that the main reason she was a part of Garnet was something made under false pretenses. Her relationship with Rose was a big part of who she was, and that part's no longer there. So she wants to rebuild what she had before, but can't rebuild it the same way it was before, but she doesn't know if rebuilding it in a new form would be as good as what they had. Steven finally proposes a solution: to propose. It's a human tradition, but so is so much else of what the crystal gems have been adopting lately. This way, the two can still be together in a less literal way. Both gyms will still enjoy their independence, while also acknowledging that they can be together. Because you can't truly love another person or another gym if you don't love yourself first. Maid of Honor. The Crystal Gems are planning the wedding between Sapphire and Ruby. Though when Sapphire sees how few invitations there are, she feels bad about the number of gems who didn't survive the war. So Steven, to cheer her up, tries to come up with other people to invite, and decides to unbubble Bismuth to increase attendance. As soon as Bismuth is freed, she freaks out at the sight of all the other bubbles in the room, wondering if Rose didn't just bubble everyone she disagreed with. It's not until freeing one of the gems and seeing the corruption on it that Bismuth realizes what actually happened. Steven then sits her down to explain the newly learned history of Rose Quartz and Pink Diamond, and after a bit of venting, Bismuth is surprisingly okay with it. She's even able to appreciate the irony of suggesting shattering Pink Diamond as a way to end the war, not realizing that that is exactly what happened. Steven is preparing to unveil Bismuth at the wedding after a speech, hoping that this will be the first step in repairing the relationship between Bismuth and the others. But Bismuth runs away back to the forge, believing herself to be unworthy of joining as she tried to shatter Steven the last time she was freed. Bismuth also points out how illogical it is that the Crystal Gems aren't together at all, that the entire reason they were founded was revealed as a ruse, so there's no reason for the few remaining gems to bother sticking together. But Steven insists that she join anyway, not because of nostalgia, but because he wants her to join. Sure, the label of Crystal Gem might be an antiquated term, but as it's the best descriptor of who they currently are, there's no reason that the term can't be repurposed into something new. Bismuth and Steven return to the temple, where the others are all waiting, and rather than disgust, they are happy to see their old friend is now their new friend. Bismuth unveils a wedding present of 2 rings for the brides-to-be. Reunited. Steven is singing as he preps everything for the wedding, the song going through all the insecurities of the various gems in attendance, as he assures them it's better to focus on a wedding instead of worrying about the Homeworld diamonds and such. Most of the characters have had some life-changing circumstances, but Steven's hoping that the wedding will be good for morale. The ceremony begins with Ruby and Sapphire exchanging vows, talking about the improvements the other half has made to their lives, and finally kissing to emerge as Garnet. One of the fun facts I learned about this show prior to ever watching it is that the creators found it important to make sure Ruby was in a dress for the wedding, as a few foreign dubs had changed her gender so as to avoid portraying a same-sex relationship. During the reception, a few of the townies mingle with the Crystal Gems, something that honestly should have happened a lot more in the series. I know this is sort of a break from the usual way that I format these videos, but a major complaint that I have about the series thus far is that the first season set up an entire dynamic about the Crystal Gems not really caring about the people of Earth while still trying to protect them, as if to say that as they grew and matured as people, they would be expected to slowly start to learn more about those who they were supposed to care about, then learn why Rose was so intent on protecting Earth. But Steven's tears of joy turn to tears of blue diamond, as Garnet predicts her appearance, and soon, 2 giant arms are in the sky bearing down on Earth. Nanafua enacts the plan for evacuation, though the diamonds aren't there to fight, but to extract the cluster for themselves. Steven attempts to dream to warn the cluster of this, but is too late as the bubble pops and smoky fusions begin to emerge from under the ground. Thankfully, this newly fused giant arm isn't servile to the diamonds, but it attacks them instead, signaling to the others it's on their side. As the cluster wrestles with Yellow Diamond's arm, Blue Diamond lands on the beach to fight with the others, stopping a fusion of Alexandrite with her sad powers. As this power only affects gems, Connie is still safe, charging at Blue Diamond, but getting stopped by the matriarch, who is furious they're still wielding the sword that shattered someone she cared about. Garnet, however, has experience with holding herself together, and she approaches Blue Diamond to tell her she cannot stop her love again. This is just a distraction, though, meant to distract her long enough to allow for Lapis's return as she drops the barn on Diamond. Peridot's excited to see her old friends returned, with Lapis finally accepting she would rather be shattered as a crystal gem than live in hiding forever. Bismuth throws Perry at Blue Diamond's head as the rest continue their assault. Meanwhile, the cluster has managed to overpower Yellow Diamond's ship, tossing it at Blue Diamond and knocking them both into the water, smashing the house in front of the temple in the process. Yellow Diamond survives this, freeing Blue from the wreckage as they stare the others down. Peridot uses the opportunity to tell off Yellow Diamond to her face, much like she did a few seasons ago, but Yellow doesn't even remember who she is and poofs her with some lightning. Then when Steven rushes to her aid, she poofs him too. Steven wakes up to see Connie over his body, which he's now separate from, as he's in a room with the physical forms of the other gems being projected over their gems, with Lapis and Peridot being poofed and thus in gem form. Steven is able to faintly communicate with Connie while his ghost passes through her, giving her a few words of encouragement before floating to the other diamonds to talk things out with them. Once again, this has always been Steven's preferred method of solving problems. Even after the diamonds arrived, he attempted to talk to them first, and only fought when Blue Diamond wouldn't listen. He encourages the others to keep going, only to be warded off by a psychic shield the diamonds have that takes a few attempts to get through. Blue Diamond is the first to hear him call out, with Yellow calming down afterwards as they realize the voice they're hearing must belong to Pink Diamond. With the shield down, Steven is finally able to show them that he is Pink Diamond, and that the one they've been mourning was never dead, only dead to them. He returns to his body to the sight of the others crying over him, the diamonds included. Legs from here to Homeworld. Blue and Yellow Diamond are happy to finally be reunited with Pink, even if they are a bit confused about what exactly a Steven is or why she looks like that. They do learn that he's got none of his mother's memories, though Yellow's sure that the memories are in there somewhere, something mostly confirmed by the multiple dream flashbacks Steven has had before. Blue's surprised that any gem survived their attack on Earth all those years ago, and then the crystal gems have to tell the diamonds that while the gems on Earth survived, most of them did so as corruptions. The diamonds are escorted to the crashed gem ship where the centipedals have been living for a few months, to show them a corrupted gem in its new habitat. Yellow Diamond attempts to undo the corruption, and manages to partially fix Nephrite with the help of Blue and Steven, the now healed gem excited to see the diamonds and speaking as though she has no memories of the events since the end of the war. When the diamonds let go of her, she reverts to a centipedal, meaning their combined powers were not enough to fix her. The metaphor here is clear. The three diamonds using their combined powers to wipe out gem life on Earth was an impulsive thing done shortly after learning that Pink Diamond was shattered. But the process of fixing a corrupted gem is slow and requires a lot more effort. So destroying something is much easier and faster than fixing a mistake. As they'll need White Diamond to fully undo all the damage, they agree to meet with her, but since the arms are damaged, they need to take Pink's ship back to Homeworld. Pink's ship is found near the junkyard from Lion 4, which I called as being the two mountains on either side of the door, and they return with this ship to Beach City, where everyone starts to say their goodbyes to the residents there. Bismuth stays behind to watch over the gems of Lapis and Peridot, warning Steven not to walk into a trap. They leave, with Yellow and Blue Diamond fearful of coming back in Pink Diamond's ship, as they're worried it'll make everything that's happened over the last 6,000 years look like a waste of time. The legs land to the sight of tons of gathered gems celebrating their return, which temporarily makes Steven think things are going to be okay, until White Pearl approaches, asking for Pink and Pink alone, bubbling them back to White Diamond. White Diamond is thrilled to see Steven, though she never lets him speak and talks down to him, like everything that's happened involving faking her death was just a little bit of fun that she has now gotten out of her system. She then teleports Steven to a tower full of bubble gems before the episode ends. Familiar. Steven is in Pink Diamond's room, lamenting that he wasn't able to hold White Diamond's attention for long. While lamenting he doesn't have a bed appears, just like Rose's room, although these objects seem to be made by a bunch of tiny pebbles who live under the floors and in the walls of Pink Diamond's room. Steven tries talking to them, thanking them for their work, and they celebrate that Pink Diamond is finally back. Pearl then enters to drop off Steven's things, upset that she's considered one of them, so she can prepare Steven for a meeting that Yellow Diamond has requested. He repeats his worries to her, though Yellow Diamond points out that being able to talk at all around White is more than she was actually expecting. Yellow herself hasn't even been able to meet with White in millennia, despite having multiple successful colonies, but when Steven suggests that she make an unsuccessful one, Yellow laughs, happy to have Pink Diamond's sense of humor back. Next, Steven is taken to a meeting with Blue Diamond, who's equally happy to see who she considers Pink Diamond. As Blue laments that White Diamond hasn't met with anyone since the end of Era 1, when Pink left them, Steven wonders if they realize he's a different person entirely and not just a new form of Pink Diamond. After a bit of talk about games they used to play that Steven doesn't remember, she leaves as she has business to attend to elsewhere. Steven is sad that no one is giving him much attention, and yet he also has a weird suspicion that everything he's doing is familiar. As he sings a song about this, he slowly realizes why. Back in the early seasons, the Crystal Gems wouldn't take him along on missions because they didn't think he was ready. Here, the Diamonds aren't taking Steven along on their business as they don't think he's ready for that sort of thing either. So to get them to pay attention, Steven prepares to do the thing his mother used to do and throw a big party for everyone. And then they'll have to pay attention. He gets into Pink Diamond's old outfit as Pearl smuggles in the rest of his friends, where Steven explains his plan to end Diamond's reign of terror with fun. Together, alone. Steven is preparing for the party only to begin coughing up locks of his mother's hair before being brought before White Diamond and waking up from the nightmare. He's worried about the upcoming party he has to throw, but does feel a little bit better about all his friends being present as they've settled into Pink Diamond's room. The proper preparations for the party begin after Steven explains his plan to talk to White Diamond and convince her to return to Earth to undo the corruption. Steven begins listing off the things he wants to have, only for the Homeworld gems to tell him all of these are unprecedented and thus forbidden. Steven tries to justify the additions as fun, but the Homeworld gems have no concept of fun, even in spite of Steven pointing out a few hobbies that they have. Not even his friends are going to be allowed to visit unless they enter in specific formations alongside those that belong together, even demanding Garnet split up so Ruby and Sapphire can enter with their own kind. The party begins, which has been whittled down to Steven sitting on Pink Diamond's throne and thanking people for announcing their arrivals to the party before standing at attention. He breaks with protocol a bit to greet Amethyst and such, with her showing off a few tricks she can do with the limb enhancers she's required to wear. Then, Yellow Diamond and Blue Diamond make their entrances to the event, telling Steven that he's doing fine because everything is so orderly. Finally, it's time for White's Pearl to announce that she will not be attending because she has other business, with this Pearl sitting atop her throne in her place to observe the party. Everybody dances slowly and robotically, pleasing White's Pearl, until Connie arrives and asks Steven to dance. He's unsure about doing this because it might displease White Diamond, but since White Diamond isn't there, he agrees to dance anyway. Connie and Steven fuse into Stevani, which ruins the party as Yellow demands to know why they have done such a thing. The rest of the Crystal Gems fuse together to defend him, but they get poofed for doing this, save for Stevani, who's thrown into a cell to think about what they've done. Escapism. Stevani is inside of a cell in the gym Homeworld, a punishment for fusing. They try a few things to get out, but ultimately fail at all of these, defusing after falling to the floor. Steven is upset that their mission to Homeworld was a failure of diplomacy, and he regrets getting everyone poofed. But Connie encourages him to keep trying and call for help. Steven remembers that this is an option via his dream powers and takes a nap. He wakes up on Watermelon Island, now split in two, frustrated because he wanted to contact Bismuth instead. Steven enters a village dedicated to worshipping his sacrificial pose from before, attempting to communicate that he needs to get back to the mainland, but failing to convince anybody. Swimming there is no easier, so he decides to build a raft, only to be found by another tribe of Stevens from the other half who are more militaristic, in memory of the Steven who led them in a fight against Malachite. The Stevens fight over him for a bit in a war decided by painting patterns on one another, but the main Steven leaves to finish up his raft. When the others see what he's doing, they eventually put aside their differences to aid in a higher purpose, soon finishing the raft and waving goodbye to Steven as he goes off to sea. The journey is difficult and he's nearly sunk by a watermelon shark, but he does make it to Lion without a few limbs. Watermelon Steven is then brought before Greg and Bismuth, who he tells about the plea for help before collapsing. Steven wakes up, back in his body on Homeworld, as he hopes that what he did was enough. Change your mind. Steven wakes up still in the tower, being scolded by Blue Diamond for bringing her pebbles into the ballroom and making a mess of things. She looks down to see the body of Pink Diamond before waking up from the memory to a very similar scene, being scolded by Blue Diamond for fusing during the party. When Connie stands up for him, saying it was her idea to dance together, Blue Diamond attacks Steven, which causes him to realize that this is far from the first time he's been locked away in the tower for acting like himself. Pink Diamond was punished in this way plenty of times. He points this out to Blue Diamond, shutting down her argument that this is for her own good by saying that if she really cares about someone, she wouldn't agree to punish them like this. This is connected to the fact that Pink Diamond fled to her own colony and started Rose's rebellion. Of course she would want to run away from an oppressive situation. Pink never let down Homeworld, Homeworld let down Pink. With this change of heart, Blue Diamond breaks Connie and Steven out to go find the rest of the bubbled crystal gems. But they're greeted by Yellow Diamond, who stands in the way. Yellow won't hear out Blue's pleas to spare the others, and the two diamonds proceed to fight one another, with Steven grabbing the gems as they're distracted. Yellow is about to poof Blue when Steven jumps in the way, saying that if every pork chop were perfect, we wouldn't have hot dogs. Then he explains this metaphor to mean that a perfect society like the one that Yellow has done so many horrible things to enforce is one that eliminates the things they love about their world, like Pink Diamond. Given this new context, it's understandable why Rose would have chosen that message specifically to be a passphrase for her canons so long ago. She prefers to have the mistakes and off-color aspects of the world around, as that's what she considers to be the things that make life worth living. Yellow has a change of heart and agrees to escort Steven and the others to the Pink Leg ship, but they're stopped by White's Pearl before they can make it there. She tells them they've misbehaved and flies into the White Head, floating into the air to activate the mech, which combines with the leg ship to form an armless mech. Then the two arms from Earth return, punching out the giant mecha and knocking it down. These are revealed to be piloted by Bismuth and Lapis/Peridot, who heard Steven's cry for help and came down to rescue the crystal gems just in time. They turn these ships over to the other diamonds who, with Steven's combined powers, take over the main mech and attempt to communicate with the White Diamond through her limbs. Once they have White semi-captive, they attempt to explain what Steven's taught them, that a society that values purity and perfection cannot exist as it will consume itself with conformity instead of adapting to grow and meet new challenges. The high standards of Gem society are causing more harm than they're helping anyone. White refuses to listen to this and blasts them with I-beams that turn the other diamonds perfect, meaning without color. Steven and the others flee from her, with Steven dropping the gems as he falls down to the surface of Homeworld. He chases the falling rocks down to stop them from being cracked, managing to pull the others out of their gem forms by fusing with them one by one, first as Smoky Quartz, then as Rainbow Quartz 2.0. They land safely, with Steven able to get Ruby and Sapphire out of their gems by fusing into a new form, one strong enough to survive a direct hit from the Diamond Mech's heel, Sunstone. Sunstone tells the others that the key to victory still involves speaking to White Diamond directly, and that they need to climb up to reach her. As Sunstone can't do this alone, they decide to fuse with the rest of the crystal gems at once to form Obsidian, the shape of the temple itself. As they're climbing, the rest of the unfused gems work to distract White's arms to clear the way for the others. Despite Connie getting a new sword from Bismuth for this purpose, they're still all knocked away, save for Obsidian herself, meaning the mission was a success. The crystal gems enter White Diamond's eye, entering her head where they see everyone in the same pose, speaking in unison. White begins to rant about the flaws of the other diamonds, that Yellow's loyalty to Homeworld wavers when Blue's nearby, and how Blue cares too much for others to do her duties. She points out that now they don't have flaws anymore, like caring too much. She says that Pink Diamond and her friends have flaws too, that they're too funny, and to stop this, she begins zapping the other crystal gems to cure them of their insecurities and dependences and obsessions. White Diamond then repeats one of Jasper's criticisms from a few seasons back, that Pink Diamond's personality brings out the worst in everyone she's exposed to. She criticizes her for doing this on purpose, that Pink wants to be the best of the worst and drags down others to feel better about herself. But Steven says that it can't be true because that's how his mom was, not him. White calls her a liar, so good at lying she's lied to herself. Then, she attempts to turn Pink Diamond back to her old form by removing the diamond from Steven, pulling it out and making Steven defuse. This pink diamond then shapeshifts a few times, taking on several different forms before finally appearing in the true form of Pink Diamond. Steven Universe. White tries to correct what she views as a flaw, but the Diamond Steven rejects the changes, blocking them no matter how much White Diamond fires at him. Human Steven and the emotionless Diamond Steven meet up, with Steven wrapping his arms around himself and smiling as they hug and dance. Diamond Steven smiling and laughing too. Diamond Steven repeatedly rebuked White's attempts to purify him by saying, "She's gone," which refers not only to Pink Diamond, but Rose Quartz as well. And yet when Steven fuses with himself once again, he does so with a callback to something his mother told him on the VHS tape. Whenever he loves himself, that will be Rose loving him through himself. So his mother, or Pink Diamond, or whoever might be gone, but there are still traces of her love out there, making changes to the world she's not a part of. White Diamond throws a tantrum to see this Steven fused back to his old form, saying that he's imperfect, and Pink Diamond can't be gone. And when Steven points out that this emotional outburst is unbecoming of a perfect being, she begins to blush. The bright pink, highlighting on her face, and the faces of those she controls, are considered both an imperfection as well as a perfectly natural reaction to seeing the situation unfolding as it is. With this loss of perfection comes a loss of control of the other gems, as White realizes there's no such thing as a flawless gem if you can get a flaw from a positive experience, like watching a reunion. The diamonds and the crystal gems return in their ship to Earth, landing on the beach during the middle of a performance by Sadie Killer and the Suspects of "Let Me Drive My Van Into Your Heart." This reunion is joined by Lars and the Off-Colors, who land just in time to see the diamonds, panicking for a bit before learning they've reformed. As Steven messed up Sadie's concert by landing in the middle of it, he makes it up to her by singing a rendition of the theme song over a montage of the diamonds getting together in Rose's spring, where they mass unbubble the previously bubbled gems, reverting them all to their old forms, and creating a reunion of so many characters from earlier seasons. With Earth cured, the upper half of the diamonds leave to return to Homeworld, as the rest of the crystal gems sit on the shore of Beach City, recreating shots from the opening as Steven sings "Change Your Mind" with his friends. The main through line of Steven Universe has to do with the cost of conformity, the fact that getting everybody to behave in a consistent way winds up filing off the best parts of a person. It's carving a gem's edges off to be more aesthetic while leaving so much valuable material on the ground into dust. The Homeworld gems value, above all else, the conformity that makes each gem more like the others, to the point that they've ruined so much of themselves in an attempt to be less abrasive. But at the same time, it's impossible to tell one gem apart from another if you do make them all conform. This is a criticism that White Diamond makes of who she thinks is Pink, that she's surrounding herself by flawed gems to feel better about herself as they all serve her for being better than they are. Except, this is all a projection on her behalf. Why would White Diamond even bother making other gems instead of simply forcing everyone to be white like she is unless it were to feel superior? Why allow for faults and diversity unless it's just to be different by being better? The cost of conformity is not just a material one either. It's one that weighs ideologically on each member of gem society. For one, to believe that people are so stratified means accepting a subservience that's built into who you are. If there are people that you are naturally superior to, then it follows that there are those who are superior to you, and that no amount of effort you make can ever make that change. Of course, this is an ideology that only exists to serve those at the top, the very few who are content with being submissive to a higher power, so long as they can still act like they're better than someone else. Even the lowest in gem society get to pretend that they have some value because at least they aren't an off-color. They don't bother to ask what happens when all the off-colors are driven out. What does a society that holds itself together on exploitation do when the classes it's tolerable to exploit are successfully eliminated? It moves on to the next tier. It's like sitting on the beach, unconcerned with the flooding, until the water begins to lap at you. And all of this is done without a clear explanation of what the benefit is. What happens when everything is identical and purified? What is the ideal end result? One can argue that it's a world without conflict or differences or fighting, but this is contradicted in its entirety by the methods used to reach this point. When the diamonds are willing to corrupt an entire planet to protect their way of life, they only argue that their way of life is something that requires mass destruction to exist. This forces a conversation to occur. What were the off-colors doing that was so much worse than wiping all life from a failed colony? What about a restrictive society makes it worth that cost, and what stops the standards of Homeworld from changing on a whim in the future? Above all else, this sort of autocracy never answers the following question about conformity and flawlessness. If it's so natural, why do they need the military to enforce it? The Crystal Gems ultimately win by being open and honest with each other, forcing the conformists to see the one thing their ideology was never able to produce, empathy. Because the truth about being perfect is that it's impossible to be perfect. Everybody's version of perfect is different and largely based around their own faults and their strengths. White Diamond was so far inside her own head that she failed to see what advantage there could be to being different. So instead of learning this, she built a world where being different was wrong. Since the Crystal Gems made a world that belonged to everybody, it was a world where everybody belonged. Even the Diamonds who had done so much to stop it from existing could only do so much before accepting they can never destroy something more powerful than they are. At that point, they could only accept their flaws as normal, and then change their minds.